So first of all, I'd like to welcome all of our GBBC members, speakers, supporters, friends, and absolutely welcome our invitees who are representing the Senate, the House, different committees, different senators' offices, different House representative offices, as well as our friends over in academia, NGO space. I want to just say a few words about why we're doing this. So number one, my name is Sandra Rowe. For those who are not familiar, I'm the CEO of the GBBC, the Global Blockchain Business Council. We actually did a demo on the Hill about 4 years ago. Some of you may have been on the Hill, some of you may not. But that was a great day. And then COVID hit, and we have not been back. So we are now back. And we're hoping we can start a new chapter with the group here who are building amazing tech, but with purpose. And so today, the mission is simple. We've got a collection of use cases that are across many different sectors, but have a commonality. Number one, what problem are we actually solving here? And everyone here is solving for different problems. What are the services and solutions that are actually being put to work? And talk a little bit about that. And here's the other thing. It's okay to fail, but the reality is we need to keep trying to build to scale. And we are at that place in life and in where stages of blockchain and digital assets are, where we need to scale to be beneficial to society. And so with that, we're also going to hear about what the positive impact to society has been with some of these use cases. We also have some reports that are critically important to this domain. And the domain covers anything that is going digital. And so the way we look at things from a GBBC perspective is that it's not blockchain in a silo, it's not digital assets in a silo, nor is it AI, by the way, which seems to be the flavor du jour of tech this year. It is actually the convergence of all of these things that are starting to impact every single person's life. And by the way, part of that also includes what do we care about when it comes to those who are left behind? The world is becoming increasingly digital. So what happens to the 2+ billion people that the UN recently said have no access to the internet? What are we going to do about that? So these are the kinds of things that we need to think about in the long run. But today, we're going to have an upbeat afternoon, because though there are some who are still stuck in the queue because there are protests going on downstairs, we are going to run a back-to-back use case, set of use cases. But I just want to highlight for those who are not familiar with the GBBC, we actually represent a number of different initiatives. We are represented by the GBBC Digital Finance Group, which is the financial services arm of GBBC. We are represented by the Interwork Alliance, which includes the Token Taxonomy Framework, which is an open source, open access, open standards initiative on anything that needs to be tokenized. We have BITA, which was originally the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance, Standard Council, which will also be represented here in discussing what they are doing. It's our latest addition to our portfolio of initiatives. And we also have GBBC Giving, which is our C3 foundation arm, which works on projects, and most recently with the United Nations World Food Program on something called Food for Crisis, which we're looking to track and trace donor funds around the world and hold donor funds accountable, that they're actually getting to the places where they need to get to. We are represented by more than 500 institutions around the world. We are not everywhere, but we are getting there. I think the diversity of our membership from NGO, activist groups, Native American tribes, and yes, we also have very large corporations that are household brand names who represent large parts of industry sectors working alongside our supranational partners, our central bankers, our regulators, and government agencies. We all need to have a voice and we do believe in that collective voice coming together, even if we don't always agree. So GBBC in a nutshell: education, advocacy, and business partnerships. So here we are today, back after 4 years. I hope you all have a good afternoon, and I'm going to hand over to our next presenter, or I should say our first use case of the day. Dale, you're up. Thank you very much. You just have to click that.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, I'm Dale Christie. I'm business fellow and blockchain strategist for FedEx. I bring you greetings from Memphis. We take a truly global view of this topic. I know we're here in the Senate. I respect what we're doing here within the U.S., but for just a few moments, if I could, I'd like to take you up to the International Space Station. We think that's where this topic should start. We go to 220 countries and territories. We go everywhere you can go globally. And at that level, it kind of looks like this. So at that level, there is no FedEx, there is no industry, there are no borders. Data knows no geographic borders. So here we are in Washington trying to work our way through, what does this look like? What is this technology? Do I need it? Why? All those kinds of things. Is it about currency? No, it's not. The foundational technology, I spend no time on the currency side. The foundational technology, we believe, is going to completely change worldwide supply chains. Our president, CEO, founder, now executive founder, Fred Smith, was on stage in New York City in early 2018, simply making statements like that. We think it's going to completely change worldwide supply chains. If you're not operating at the edge of innovation or technology, you need to be prepared to be commoditized or potentially to become extinct. Those are pretty bold statements for somebody in that position, and yet he sat there and had these conversations. Shortly after that, our CIO talked about the fact that we think for this to scale, it has to be bigger than us. What that's translated to is that we work as part of BIDA, as part of GBBC, with UPS, with others, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in what I refer to as a co-opetition, a pro-competitive co-opetition. We think it's going to take all of us to create standards, to create reference architecture, and then we all are in business or doing things to benefit that. We think we have to get these foundational layers out there first. And so we've now spent a number of years, I say the collective we, I think in many cases we've spent a lot of time talking about who, what, and when. So who, FedEx, what, blockchain or Web3, when, we're all trying to figure that out. And I think really what will ultimately scale this is why. So in working with the C-suite, in working with people who are focused at that level, risk and opportunity, fiduciary responsibility, what is it they're trying to accomplish? Chances are it's not a technology discussion, or how cool is a smart contract, or how sexy is peer-to-peer, or all these other hype-related types of things that we've heard for many, 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 many years from that point of view. Why gets us to, again, risk and opportunity. What are the types of things that we can accomplish? If I can have a conversation with a CFO about their accounts receivable, now they're interested. If I walk in and try to teach them about a new technology, not so interested. And so we believe that that's what's going to scale that from that point of view. And so FedEx celebrated our 50th birthday earlier this year. And I would probably, if we had time, I know we're on a quick schedule here, but if I had time and asked you, when you hear FedEx, what do you think about from that point of view? Chances are you're probably going to say, well, they delivered something for me, or they picked it up, or whatever the case may be. It's going to be something around a physical package movement. And that's correct. And I think the first 50 years of FedEx, that's probably a pretty good representation. The next 50 years, I think, is actually on the right-hand side of this slide, which is, in this case, representing a digital twin, a digital representation of that physical package. Once we can digitize these tens of millions of packages that we have and all the others have moving around there, it opens us up to a number of things. And I was having a conversation before we started here, going back literally thousands of years BCE, goods were moved. Trade happened with camels or with a boat on a river or other types of things. And everything to that moment has been a process improvement initiative on that. So we started with clay tablets and wood and papyrus and paper, but we've had bills of lading for 400 or 500 years, and essentially they haven't changed at all. We are finally at the moment, literally at the moment right now in our lifetimes, where we are going to digitize those processes. But it can't be FedEx digitized, and it can't be UPS or DHL or other examples individually. We can't own that. We have to work together, thus the co-opetition reference. Once it is digitized, we can now see a very different world than what we experienced during the pandemic, where nobody could buy paper towels, nobody could buy other things because of how complex the global supply chains are. Once it's digital, Sandra can be a trusted shipper, and when she ships something into the United States, the speed of data is faster than the speed of package. She can simply get it to U.S. Customs. They can recognize that. She's a trusted shipper. That's the happy path. Keep it moving. They don't know me necessarily. They may slow that down. There's a very different world on the horizon here from our point of view. And again, yes, FedEx wants to be in the middle of all that, but we also take a broad view of that, and we want to be one of those at the table that's talking about things like standards and interoperability and digital identity and things like that. So Sandra just mentioned blockchain, IoT, and AI. I actually think blockchain might ultimately be the killer app for AI, because anybody that talks about that, oh, have you used ChatGPT, have you done that? Well, be careful now, you don't know where that's coming from. Well, if it had a blockchain connection, you would know the source. Whether that's a good source or a bad source, but you'd know the source, and ultimately I think these are going to coalesce. And we've been referring to this, I didn't know she was going to mention that, I just happen to have a slide, but we've been talking about it for a couple of years. We refer to it as the trifecta. Any one of these are great technologies. Blockchain's great, IoT is great. AI essentially is just a blender where you used to prepare something by hand, and now you've got a blender to mix it up. It's the same source materials. Blockchain and AI and IoT are very different source materials, right? So IoT is going to give you the pulse of something, temperature, humidity, shock, light, those kinds of things. Blockchain will memorialize that in an immutable fashion. We think there's a ton of things that applies to, including bringing product safely into the United States, U.S. Customs and other many examples from that point of view. So when we talk about this being at this, like the intersection of the physical and digital worlds, the physical world, I think we're familiar with that. So it's, you know, it's pickup, it's at the hub, it's out for delivery, it's those kinds of things. That could be a package or a pizza. We're all well aware of those kinds of things at this point. The digital world is actually more of an MRI. There's multiple layers there from that point of view, and there is a digital version of that, but we also start getting deeper and deeper into chain of custody. Where is it? So that tends to be for cold chain or pharma or things like that from that point of view. IoT, so we know that it's origin, you know, pickup, hub, destination, et cetera. IoT sensors give us a ton more data, a lot more data. But it's not until we get to blockchain that it connects those dots into the story of Sandra. We now know it is an authentic Sandra item. It's an authentic Rolex or Gucci bag or conflict-free diamond or other types of things from that point of view. And so they don't do the same thing, but they are really complementary from that point of view. And we really think that there's a great future ahead as we explore them individually as well as when we start combining them. Digital product passports is another thing that when you start hearing things like circular economy and green economy from that point of view, the EU is working on things like this for deforestation, and in this example for batteries. So in the future, we will want to know where those things are coming from. The provenance, the authenticity, the pedigree that we get from blockchain helps us in this conversation. So where was the battery created? It went into a vehicle. Person A bought the vehicle. Person B bought the vehicle from person A. Ultimately, it is reclaimed or recycled. Digital product passports are going to allow us to follow that all the way through the life cycle of that so that we know where those things are. And it's certainly not limited to this example. FedEx worked with the Health Canada, the Public Health Agency of Canada. They reached out to us and said, we want to find out, are you able to help us prove essentially the provenance of COVID vaccine before we put these shots into our citizens? And we created a use case that involves exactly what we're talking about, which is, yes, we can get that product. We can put a sensor on it. We get the pulse. We can tell you what the temperature range is. It kept it within the range. It did all the things from your point of view. And then we memorialize that, in our case, onto an Ethereum blockchain. They were thrilled with the outcome. We think that's a foundational use case to combine these technologies, and it will likely start in bigger areas, so big pharma or could be aerospace, aircraft parts, various things like that from that point of view. Where you absolutely need to know those things, it's going to start in the higher end things, and then little by little, it will simply be a layer under everything. And so, you know, a 10-year-old today, a newborn today, is going to simply know where the coffee bean came from in the cup of coffee that they're drinking. They're going to want to know where the denim came from. Is it sustainable? Is it organic? Is it this? Is it that? They're going to want to know those things. My sense is by then, ESG will be a thing from a corporate point of view. And if it's at a corporate point of view, then it's also going to be at a personal point of view. So whether you end up with a personal sustainability score, you know, what is Sandra's? Oh, hers is 82, mine's 68. Well, who do you purchase from? How does that work? This gives us objective data underneath many of those layers from that point of view. And we think in order to make that happen, that's where we are connected to GBBC. So the Blockchain and Transport Alliance, we are founding members back to 2017. UPS is also a founding member. We are working as co-chairs on the GSMI initiative in the supply chain area, which we're just about to finalize at this point. And we're focused on open source and royalty-free harmonized standards in global commerce. And everything in our life has something to do with standards, whether that's traffic lights or the electricity or anything. This is going to be no different. However, the challenge is, and I'm going to go back to my word coopetition for a second, the challenge is most of the time you get entities that are saying, I want to beat that person, I want to beat that entity to something. And a lot of people treated blockchain like the internet and said, let's just get rich quick. And from our point of view, that 220 country and territory perspective allows us to really pull back and say, wait a second, it's going to take everybody. So look to your left, look to your right in this room. It doesn't matter which party in this country, it doesn't matter what company, whether you're competitors or not. Ultimately, we think that there's a value layer that sits underneath that. And so the way I would describe it is, am I a competitor? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, well, it's UPS and FedEx, whatever the case may be. But we also differentiate. The piece that, and we tend to stop right there at this binary discussion. The piece that we're missing, I think, is the core of this whole discussion, which is there's value creation in answering the question, where can we agree? Where do we agree? Well, FedEx, UPS, DHL, if we can reduce friction across borders, that's paper, that's delays, that's resources, there's many other examples of this, we all win. Every one of us wins. So it's not about me winning or beating somebody or somebody else. Of course, we're in business to do things from that point of view, but we see this as a foundational layer that needs to be built first, and then we can all look at it on a more proprietary basis from that point of view. And so I'll finish with this slide, which is, coopetition is a word that was used for the first time in 1911. This will not be on the test, I promise. It was in reference to an oyster company from the East Coast, from the Boston area, Cape Cod area, that they developed this kind of a 5-gallon pail that had an inner area with oysters in it and ice around it, and then it was sealed. Well, they were incredibly successful. They shipped it all the way to Canada, to the west coast of the United States, to Cuba. And basically, the owner of that put the message out to the people in the same city, look, when you're selling this, you are not competitors, you're actually in a coopetition. Your competitor is the person in the wooden bucket selling oysters out of that. But while you're here, you're actually working to the good of both from that point of view. We've seen that happen back to the mid-1800s with railroad track width. With other things around schedules. You don't want two trains coming at each other. I mean, there's lots and lots of these things in our life that we don't really think about, but it's not new. Airline industry, auto industry in the early 1900s, same thing. You don't want two planes land at the same time. You want communications from that point of view. But we've only seen one global technology to date, and it's the internet. Well, the internet the standards were created by a really small number of scientists and engineers, TCP/IP, HTTP, you know, those kinds of things that we all take for granted. In this case, this technology got out, and the world is out here trying to figure it out and use it from that point of view. We think in this case, for it to scale, and it will scale, it's going to take you, look to your left, look to your right, it's going to take every one of us here, it's going to take every one of us out here, and on that broader picture of the globe. And with that, I thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Honored. And thank you, Dale, for that really great presentation. I was furiously taking notes, so that was really inspiring. And we really do believe that for this foundational technology to really take its place in the new digitally native future, that we really do need to put our arms down, hands together, and work shoulder to shoulder. I think that's another term that you use very often, to build that new future together. Oh, here I am. So I'm Ari Yu, Executive Director for the U.S. Blockchain Coalition. And I'll be presenting the state of Web3. We built this 106-page report earlier this year that built out a battle card for every single state across the United States, looking at the economic impact of the Web3 industry state by state. We looked at the number of startups. We looked at federal grants and research going on at the academic institutions. We looked at venture capital and public sources of funding. We looked at the list of incumbents. So the whole ecosystem is what we mapped out state by state. A little just quick intro. I'm an entrepreneur and technologist by background, 22 years. Coming from the Pacific Northwest, working for the likes of Google and Microsoft is my background. We really believe, as the US Blockchain Coalition, that the states are the best laboratories for democracy. I'm really just like in awe to be here in Washington, D.C. and seeing the very giant buildings and just beautiful architecture of the city. But we also want to remember that the states, that's where the people live. That's where we are here, boots on the ground, as entrepreneurs and as builders and as families and as friends. And the states have so much power and there's so much opportunity that we're very often missing because there's just so much going on here in D.C. as well. If you ever want to see the full report, please email me. It's broken out by region based off the CHIPS Act. And so we broke out the report by the 6 different regions. But I'll just walk through the quick little high-level highlights, right? So we picked out some of the national trends. There are some interesting states across the US. We often talk about California or New York or, of course, Wyoming, Texas, and Florida. But there are a lot of states that are doing really great work. Dale Christie just came from Tennessee. Tennessee is actually very well known for the healthcare industry, especially in Web3. Nevada for gaming, Maryland for government. We have a lot of government investment going on in the world of Alabama, South Carolina, and Montana. Obviously, Texas, and another one that kind of popped up that we didn't realize was going to be there was Georgia. A lot of activity, not that much international investors. There has been a lot of hype and a lot of different narratives that have been in media, but at the end of the day, what we have seen is that startups are the ones that are doing a lot of the employment. And then we also see a lot of enterprises that are increasingly hiring and doing more research in this space. And so, as enterprises like Dale Christie at FedEx come out and share their stories of how they see the new future that we're going to be building together, I think this will become, the lights will come on for more and more of us. As mentioned before, most of the companies in the Web3 space are small. They're less than 50 people. And so just like America, it is the small companies that are the backbone of this industry. The thing that stuck out for Web3 companies, typically in startups, especially at the startup seed, Series A, you usually see a lot more of the United States venture capitalists that are investing. In the Web3 industry, just because it is supposed to be a global first technology, we see quite a few international investors. Over 29% of investors in Web3 companies are international. And so that's something to note. Whether you're an investor or you're an enthusiast or you're an entrepreneur. This chart is very exciting for a lot of folks. We looked at the count of startups by state, and then we also looked at billions of dollars that are invested into these startups by state. And so obviously, just because the great market activity that's going on in California and New York, they are number 1 and number 2. But if you look at the rest of the states, on the count of startups, we see Florida, Texas, Illinois, Delaware, Massachusetts, Washington, Colorado, and Georgia. Pretty interesting. On the right side, you'll see the billions of dollars invested. Some states did pop up that were, kind of unusual, right? Like Nevada's on there, Georgia's on there, New Jersey's on there. One state that we didn't see on there that we thought we would see a lot more of was Wyoming, just because they've done so much to make it a very favorable environment for Web3 companies. And so, that's where we come to, the markets are where the market is, right? Like most of the business, especially the economic activity in technology, is coming out of California and New York, and they are going to be the big drivers of the policy conversation too as well. A lot of incumbent growth is happening. I mean, we heard from, again, FedEx, but there's JP Morgan Chase, Fox, Cigna, Overstock. We wanted to document that there is quite a few enterprise and incumbent activity in this Web3 space. Despite what may be perceived, the federal government is also increasing spend year over year in this space. When I first heard this, I was like, oh, really interesting. Is it all around workforce development, right, and jobs? Maybe, but it's actually really around research and building out proof of concepts and prototypes in this technology. So I thought that was really interesting. So despite what is being reported in the media, we are seeing a lot more federal funding coming in. Wanted to just highlight a few states, New York, Texas, and of course my state of Washington State. But here, the Empire State, you can see the ecosystem mapping. I mean, New York is firing on all cylinders, right? Whether you look at startups or investments or incumbents or academia or government, over 969 startups, a bunch of them are unicorns, 39% have received at least one round of funding, and 10 companies already. I mean, if you consider how old this Web3 space is, it's astonishing at the pace that these companies are going to IPO or getting acquired. Just the exit pace is just really, really strong. And we also do a second page for a larger state, so we also documented the jobs. A lot of times when we're talking to policymakers, they're like, yeah, jobs, but are they all super coders, wearing black hoodies and blockchain engineers? No, there's a lot of jobs in this industry. Customer support, analysis, marketing, community. Here's Texas, Lone States. They've been very focused on the Bitcoin mining front. But as you'll see with this year in the North American Blockchain Summit, they're focusing on expanding their horizons and supporting the rest of the Web3 ecosystem. Again, like there's just, they're firing on all cylinders as well, but doing extremely well on the academia, government, and incumbent investment front. Again, jobs noted. And then for my last part, talking about Washington State, I circled in red because, for me, as being in Washington State physically, we've been really doing great on the incumbent. Washington is probably the epicenter of the enterprise activity across the United States. We do really great on the startup and VC front, but one area that is a weakness is around federal funding. Very few startups out of Washington State are getting actually that public sources of funding, and we have very little engagement from academia, and so that's something that we're working on improving. And that's it. It's kind of like the state of the affairs amongst the states.
Thank you. It's actually quite fitting that I'm going next because when we were talking about federal projects and funding related to blockchain research. This is actually how I got my start in blockchain development. I started in blockchain development working for management consulting companies building government use case projects, one of which is actually on mainnet in production. It was actually going to present here today, but their approval process takes a little bit longer than the requirements of coming here and standing. So while I'm not talking about the government blockchain use case that I had previously worked on, that has since shipped to production, I'm talking about Ava Labs, our mission statement, digitizing the world's assets, and importantly, kind of our vision and why we're building what we're building. My name is Lucian Stroy. I'm a software engineer. Official title is Web3 Solutions Architect. But I prefer basically just to say that I take advanced high-level technology and I get businesses to actually use it in production in the real world. And I take great pride in actually pushing real-world production applications almost every day. So at Ava Labs, I first have to start, why blockchain? First of all, it's a very cool technology, right? And I talk about it way too much. I think there are too many people who don't understand how the technology works who like to talk about it because of its potential. But at a high level, what blockchain has achieved is really cool. It's the fastest way to get a large number of computers to agree on anything securely. And that has extreme value. And in a world in which we highly distrust our information security practices, even at the federal level, for very good reason, we have developed an industry that has essentially thrown out all of the existing playbook and had to rebuild everything from the ground up with higher security assumptions and constant nation threat actor security models, right? I work at a company that is clearly a target for nation-state cyber attacks every single day, right? And we built a technology that can handle it. And it handles it well, to the point where we now start working with other companies, right? Like JP Morgan and other regulated financial institutions, which is the focus of my talk now, on how they could do the same thing. And why do we do this? It's primarily because we wish to digitize the world's assets. And essentially, it's not just the transfer of money, but it's also the transfer of FedEx packages. It's the transfer of Pokemon cards. It's the transfer of JPEGs, if you want. People can do whatever they want, but in reality, what we're trying to accomplish and what we can accomplish if we succeed is nothing short than increasing the entire velocity of money in the US economy. And it's not just of money, right? Because we've already demonstrated that we can pass value across the internet, but we could also pass assets. We can pass arbitrary units of measurement. It doesn't really matter. We can make, to go back to the first slide, we could make essentially the fastest way for a large number of computers to agree on anything securely. So it doesn't have to be money, it doesn't have to be assets, it doesn't have to be stocks. However, to demonstrate the real world potential, I think that there's nothing more important to demonstrate than purely speeding up the velocity of money. Because if we reduce the time to settle financial transactions and we eliminate the need for third-party organizations to escrow funds in transit, we have literally sped up the velocity of money, which is one of what's assumed to be the constants of economic growth. And it's ambitious, and this is why I'm truly excited about the potential of our technology. So, the other issue that I need to address is, why is our technology fundamentally different? And it has enabled things that have previously not been possible, and essentially the use cases that are in production, for some reason, get diminished. And very often I have to answer, especially when I approach regulated financial institutions, like, why don't we just use a database, right? And there's actually a very simple reason. Like, yes, please use a database. It's much easier. It would make my job unnecessary because there's plenty of databases. They're easy to use. Blockchain is hard to use. There's only a few that actually work. And hopefully we're building one of them. So when an organization asks me, why not just use a database? What I tell them is that every time you add another organization to your database, you essentially get the security property of the weakest of any party that you've integrated with. So in the work that I was doing for US federal government projects, that is a non-starter. And if you've ever tried to do a data sharing agreement with a US federal entity, you will know that they will actually fail. And this is actually a recurring occurrence. Two institutions that have completely aligned visions, right? And they literally cannot pass information between each other because they can't figure out the information security requirements. So this is actually incredibly common. Now imagine you go into competitive industries and then you try to integrate their data and have them securely share information. It's actually a non-starter. So what you end up needing is to build off of a completely new technology that's viewed as neutral ground, where you can essentially have the transfer of secure value upon these networks. And the beauty of blockchains, and especially public blockchains, because the next question is like, does it have to be a public blockchain? Can it be a private permissioned one? Like, those work sometimes. And the answer is yes, we can build private permissioned blockchains. We have been, but those use cases haven't gotten to the level of success of public blockchains for one simple reason. When you add an organization to a blockchain, you are essentially hardening the entire system. It's a property that I would call anti-fragility. So if you have a blockchain that has, like ours, 1,600 nodes, completely random, unknown people, they have different network security standards, they have different information security standards, you effectively build a system that is so widely scattered over the world that no single software vendor like SolarWinds can ever actually take down an entire system. The actual dispersion of the network running the same software allows everyone to agree on the same thing securely. So what have I been building? And I don't take the full credit of this. I have an amazing organization behind me. And of course, like, we're actually building with partners and we're helping use cases actually use our technology. So I don't want it to seem like we're the ones building all of this, because we can't. We have to work with everyone in this room. It's a massive undertaking. But to give a quick example, Intane, which is live on a permissioned blockchain that is on our public network, is actively improving the traceability of loan documents relating to mortgage-backed securities. In mortgage-backed securities, if there is an update, you have to update several institutions simultaneously. If I pay off my mortgage, hopefully soon, I will basically have to announce my financial institution, they have to close the loan, and then they have to basically inform every single participant in the securitization process. And as you can tell, there gets to be a lot of people involved in this process, and it's highly secure. I hope they keep my financial information secure. And what Intane has done is they brought it on chain and basically uses the blockchain's ability to coordinate secure updates of information across disparate organizations. So what is the result? They've noticed a 90% improvement in their operating costs, and they're able to essentially take a mortgage-backed security ticket and reduce it in size to individual investors from 100 million, which is basically like the smallest tranche that they could sell a securitized product, down to 10 million. And this is just one asset in one use case, and it's the first. So you spread this across, and there are tons of off-chain, off-exchange assets and different asset types that can benefit from this type of improvement in the optimization of just what is let's be honest, a boring back office operation that no one is going to essentially start promoting on social media, but it's going to have real impact, and it could potentially reduce the borrowing costs for individuals because of increased operational efficiency. So this is the type of work that's left to be done. It might not be the most attention-grabbing. It might not be an NFT that is worth a lot more than you think it should be, but it has immediate direct impact on people's lives, and it's live on mainnet today. So the next use case that I'll talk about is essentially a network that we've gotten together. It's a consortium of projects that allows for regulated financial institutions, including T. Rowe Price, WisdomTree, Wellington, Cumberland, both buy-side and sell-side financial institutions, and they are, again, deployed on a permissioned network that is on top of our public network. Participants of this network are KYC'd. Institutions who deploy smart contracts are KYB'd, but because of how we designed the network, they can actually use Uniswap and Aave and lending protocols and take advantage of all of the permissionless blockchain use cases and innovations, and essentially take real-world assets and use modern blockchain technology on it. And it's one of these things in which it's kind of in limbo because it's on testnet, and there definitely needs to be some clarity coming from certain institutions for this to ever be pushed into a more public forum with real assets. But I think the use case and the establishment of a precedent is what's important here, right? Like, these institutions want to do it. We have the ability to show them how to do it. And it's essentially just us trying to say, hey, look at this. We think this is actually like how this could actually work. And we're not, to the best of our knowledge, breaking any rules. So in another more specific use case that we're actually presenting next week, so I have to leave the actual institution who built this anonymous for now, but if you look at Avalanche's announcements at Singapore FinTech Festival, you'll be able to see further details and reports of how we actually were able to do this. We've basically built a foreign exchange trading system with all of the back office reporting and auditability rules built into smart contracts. So if you essentially take a spot price on a foreign exchange trade, all of the back office's and auditability rules automatically happen in the back end, right? Like, imagine doing finance with your accounting being automated. It would be great. And this is essentially what we're demoing. It's another use case, but before I go, I do want to highlight the fact that not every use case that I work on is about regulated finance. In fact, I spend most of my time helping video game companies launch their in-game economy. Why? Because they're the most tech savvy. I swear they're better software engineers than I am. And we can do really cool things with them. And they're experimental and they're creative. And the types of things that we're able to do are literally unique. And it's very cool. For example, Shrapnel, it's a game that's going to be launching in December, allows for a gamer to basically create custom in-game assets, and you basically bring it with you in the game, and you play for keeps, right? So you go into the game with a custom created asset, and it's basically a survival shooter, so it's an extraction shooter. So whatever you bring in, you're basically risking it all. And you have the ability to basically extract with a streamer's gamer tag because you actually saw him and you got the jump on him in a game. And the ability to do like fun, kind of innovative things with this technology is equally as important as regulated financial FX trading. It's just as important because it's a technology. The important thing is not the technology, it is what it is used for when it comes to regulating how it's used. We have regulation for financial products, and it should be applied whether it's tokenized or not tokenized. This isn't necessarily something that's controversial, but the same thing should be applied for video game assets. If there's a video game asset and they happen to use blockchain technology in order to power that video game asset, then it should be regulated like it's a video game asset. Great, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Wiki. My name is Wiki To. I'm the business architect for Onyx Coin Systems. I look at how we design our business and product capabilities as we are looking at, sorry, I just realized I need to click through. Yeah. As we are looking at developing the next generation financial ecosystems. So I joined Onyx about a year ago. I moved recently to New York about 6 months back. Actually, before Onyx, I was at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where I was leading Project Ubin on wholesale CBDCs, and subsequently, I was seconded to the BIS Innovation Hub, working on Project Damba on multi-CBDCs. So my history has always been working very much on the CBDC, central bank digital currencies part of it. It's really exciting for me now to be here at Onyx because the past 6 years or so, I've been doing a lot of experiments, but what we are doing at Onyx now are live and at scale. And I'll explain to what scale that we are at today, and that's probably quite interesting for some of you guys over here. So Onyx, we have been live for more than 2 years, probably going to about 3 years now. For our clients, We actually saw transaction value of more than 300 billion last year in 2022. So that's actually quite a sizable amount. I mean, compared to the total size of what we do from cross-border payments perspective, it's probably a small fraction. I mean, it is good news for us. It means that we do have a lot of room to grow. But it also shows that actually what we are doing is already live and real. Today, we transact about $1 billion in value daily. From our clients' perspective, they are able to do transactions across our major funding locations, like between, say, Singapore, London, and New York, in less than 120 seconds. So 120 seconds is the number that my legal said we should put it there. But in actual fact, most of the time, it's like you click a transaction, you click refresh, you see that it's already done. So actually, the technology does allow us to bring things to a different level, and I'll explain a bit more about why we are able to do that. Oh, and one important thing, one of our clients actually said that they have seen liquidity cost savings of about 10%. So it's not just about a cool technology. It actually brings real benefits to our customers. Before I go into, just explaining about what we are doing on Coin and on Patio, I do want to give an overview about generally how we see, the evolution of digital currencies, the stepwise measures that we are taking to eventually bring us to this ultimate vision. If you look at from bottoms up, we talk about shared ledger technology. That's really the core behind what we are doing over here. If you think about it, it's really the underlying blockchain platform and our application that we deploy on the blockchain platform for the purposes of digital currency transaction. We have implemented it first as a single bank ledger. That's what we call JP Morgan Coin. What I was mentioning about just now, what we are doing in terms of like daily transaction volume of more than $1 billion. That is live in production today. We have clients who are largely large multinational companies who are using our platform. But of course, you'll be wondering, so, blockchain technology, ultimately, this is about multiple banks. This is about decentralization. What's the point of deploying it within just your own environment? The vision for us is actually working towards a multi-bank ledger. That is what we call Patio. But before we are able to do that, we have to first build the technology within what regulators are comfortable with, within what our compliance folks are actually comfortable with, which is why we took the technology, use it to link up our different branches across different systems internally. So at least this is within JP Morgan's environment. And from that perspective, we are able to get people, regulators, our internal compliance, comfortable with this idea of using blockchain technology and how we can use it to connect, multiple participants together. In our case, for JP Morgan Coin, they are still internal participants. The next step is really looking at this idea of a shared ledger, which we did in Patio. Patio is a joint venture between JP Morgan, DBS Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, and Temasek. What it is essentially this multi-bank ledger where we are able to issue digital currencies on the platform itself such that everyone is able to transact directly with each other. I'll go into a bit more details later of what that actually means and why it brings about benefits. One of the presenters just now talked about why blockchain. This is really one of the good use cases of blockchain where it is a multi-bank platform. And eventually, our vision is really towards this view of a universal or unified ledger, a ledger where there are multiple different assets, multiple different currencies. That's when you start to see really interesting things happening, like the whole idea of atomic settlement, of composability, where essentially decentralized applications on a common blockchain platform are able to interact seamlessly with each other. The other point which I wanted to make is that if you look at our whole journey, we talk about, I mentioned that we have been live for more than 2 years, but actually the journey started a lot earlier. So even before Onyx was formed, we had this Blockchain Center of Excellence, and that was a vehicle of which we used to start doing experiments with a lot of different parties. We did Project Ubin with MAS. I was actually on the MAS side back then. Onyx was one of the big contributors towards the project. That was back in 2016. It was a multi-phase project. We really understand, through working with the industry about what the technology is best suited to do, what are some of the benefits that we can get from the technology. So in parallel, there was this set of work with the industry, and we were also developing our JP Morgan Coin, which eventually went live. Project Damba was another collaboration with multiple central banks, Project Dunbar was especially interesting because if you think about the underlying model, what we are doing with Patio is identical to this idea of a multi-CBDC. Because the only difference is that on Patio, these are commercial bank money, the issuers are settlement banks. So you have the likes of like JP Morgan for US dollar, DBS Bank for Sing dollar, and we issue currencies for participants to transact with. In Project Dunbar, what it was central banks actually issuing CBDC. So from a technical perspective, the model was directly replicated. We were actually able to show that, hey, the idea of multi-CBDCs actually work. And from a universal ledger perspective, this is where we did work with MAS, on Project Guardian, on Project Orchid, where we started looking at this idea of deposit tokens. Deposit tokens are not live. We think that there's a lot of interesting things that can happen through deposit tokens, but at the same time, from a regulatory framework perspective, we do need additional clarity before we are comfortable with actually bringing it to the next step. So talking very specifically about JP Morgan coin itself, if you look from left to right, what are some of the benefits that our clients are actually able to get from using JP Morgan coin? So we allow for 24/7 real-time transfers across borders. What it means is that if we have clients in Singapore, they are able to transact, they are able to move funds to New York any time of the day, and it will take place almost instantly. This is very useful because traditionally or conventionally, before we have this idea of 24/7 real-time cross-border payments, what typically happens is that there is very little overlaps in operating hour between Singapore and New York. So in many situations, if you are looking at cross-border payments, it's typically at least a T+1. What it means is that from a treasury perspective, you need to do forecasting, you need to move funds ahead in anticipation of your actual needs. Now, once you are able to move funds any time of the day, you actually do away with the whole idea of forecasting because funds are available anytime. If I need funds in Singapore, I draw it from my account in US, in New York, in London. I can move funds anywhere. I do away with forecasting altogether. I do away with the need to pre-fund my accounts in all the different locations in anticipation of needs that may or may not happen. This is really the reason why I mentioned about the 10% liquidity savings for one of our clients who is a large e-commerce player, because previously they would have needed to keep all these pools of liquidity in different locations. They are able to stop doing that and just move funds as and when they need to. The other really interesting thing that we are looking at is really from a programmable payments perspective. There should be some announcement coming out in a couple of days, couple of weeks. That will be something really interesting. So if you think about programmable payments, now previously, so the idea of programmable payments are not that new, because if you think from a treasury management perspective, you do use like ERP system, treasury management systems, but how it works is that it pulls data from the banks, check for account balances and say, okay, I need to move certain funds, and then they push an instruction to the banks to move those funds itself. What we are able to do is that we take the logic from the treasury management system and deploy it within our bank's environment, which means that there's a set of programmable instructions that is just waiting there, checking balances, and if balances fall below a certain predefined amount, it's actually able to then evaluate from which account should I draw these funds from, and subsequently actually initiate the actual payment itself. So all of these things take place again in real time within our environment, and that actually provides a lot of efficiency gains for our customer. Programmable payments is something that is pretty new. Not everyone is able to have the expertise to take advantage of it yet. So we do see customers that still want to connect with us from a more conventional perspective. We are able to allow connection through various different connectivity means, whether they are APIs, through Swift connectivity messages, or even UI. We do allow all of these different channels today. And on top of that, we provide real-time visibility so that our clients at any point in time can know what is the status of their transaction, what is the status of their balances. This is just a map to just show you, these are the major funding locations that we have today, and we are able to move funds real-time 24/7 between these different locations. The other thing which I want to talk more about is really the idea of Patio. So I mentioned briefly just now, when we think about JP Morgan coin, it is still within a single environment. When we think about blockchain technology, why does blockchain makes payments cheaper, safer, faster? You hear that all the time. No one really explains why. The reason why we are able to do that is because we are able to bring parties onto a common platform, and that is what helps to essentially flatten the ledgers and shorten the payment chains. Now, if you think about traditional cross-border payments, you typically go through multiple different hops. With each hop, there's an intermediary processing transaction that adds to overheads. Overheads results in additional time, additional cost. If you are able to flatten all of that, we put everyone on a single ledger, that is how we gain the efficiencies. So why blockchain technology? Because traditionally, if you try to build this shared platform, who will actually operate the platform? Now, we talk about, on this platform itself, there's JP Morgan, DBS, Standard Chartered. If this was a traditional system, how do we, decide who will actually operate it? So the solution over here is very simple. All of us operate it. We each operate a node so that we are comfortable with what is being recorded on this common platform. At the same time, on this platform itself, we are able to deploy our own applications. The applications are secure. You never have to worry about someone else actually tampering with your application. That is really why we see value over here in using blockchain technology to bring multiple parties onto a common platform. So in Patio, we are part of it. We are live on Patio today. Again, probably you'll hear something more in the next couple of days. Patio is really a platform that we feel will greatly simplify cross-border payments, make it much cheaper and faster for banks to do transactions with in the future. I'm not going to go into much details on this slide. I just thought I'll end with something that looks really cool. We are building the foundation of for the future of money. If you guys have any questions, happy to take some questions. If not, then that's the end of my sharing. Thank you so much.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Rachel Horn, Head of Marketing and Communications at Filecoin Foundation. So today, I got my first holiday party invitation of the year. And I imagine that you all know this scene in Washington where the first question at every holiday party is, so what do you do? And I always say, hi, I'm Rachel. I've been at Filecoin Foundation now for 4 years, and it's a crypto project, and then eyes just completely glaze over. Or I get questions like, what is it good for? What does it do? And I, every year, play a little game with myself of how many hearts and minds can I change at these parties? And so I'm going to make my pre-2023 holiday party pitch to you all. You let me know how it goes. Okay. So what is the Filecoin network? Is anybody in this room familiar with the Filecoin network? Oh, good. Look at that. See, this is better than any holiday party I go to. So Filecoin is a decentralized storage network designed to store humanity's most important information. Two really important words here. It is decentralized and it is open source, meaning there is no central authority, no middleman, no company at the middle monitoring these transactions. It's entirely automatic. So Filecoin Foundation, which I represent, is just one of many organizations in this Filecoin ecosystem that's helping to support and grow this network. We support through grants and other forms of funding. We run hackathons and other developer programs. We support storage providers who are coming onto the network. So we are like your friendly cheerleaders for the network. And I think this network is really incredible. It's rivaling major, big, centralized tech platforms. So let's talk a little bit about how it works. So one thing that's important for everybody to understand is that Filecoin is a blockchain technology, but your data is not stored on the blockchain. So what happens is there are 3,000 storage provider networks around the world. These are groups that said, you know what, I have extra storage capacity, extra servers in my office or in my home or wherever, and I want to contribute that storage capacity to the Filecoin network. And so we have these 3,000 there all over the world, and then storage clients, which is anybody with large amounts of data, can choose storage providers to work with based on any number of factors. So Location, you want the data closer to you. Energy consumption, you want to work with green storage providers. There's a whole program for that. Price, that's another factor that different groups represent. And you can store many, many copies of your data for the cost of storing with traditional services like AWS. And then once you make these deals, this is where the blockchain and the crypto comes into play. So there is a computer program that is automatically checking that the files are reliably stored. And if they are not, if a storage provider decides, you know what, like I'm tired of this game, I want to go do something else, or I'm going to change my business model, they are slashed, they're penalized. So there is an incentive on both ends, and this computer program is what's constantly checking that your files are secure. But most importantly and critically, there is no company in the middle. There's nobody taking a cut of the profits of data storage. And right now, as you probably all know, there are 3 or 4 companies globally that store the majority of the world's data. So we have a really exciting pathway ahead. So Filecoin is built on a technology called IPFS that I think is really cool, and so I want to tell you all about it. So everybody's familiar with HTTP, right, which is you put that into the beginning of a web address, and that is a program that tells the computer which server to go to retrieve content. And it's based on where that data is. So IPFS is a way of addressing content based on what the content is rather than where it is. And so why is that important? So I'm stealing this from somebody else, but I'll share it with you all here. There's a great analogy here of, let's say somebody tells you to go to a library and pick up a book for them. Say I tell Sandra to go to the library and pick up a book for me, and I say, Sandra, will you please go to the New York Public Library for me? Go to the 3rd floor. Go to the 5th stack on the right and the 6th shelf from the top, and the 4th book over. That's what I want. Will you pick it up for me? And Sandra, who's so lovely, goes and does this for me. And she gets to that point in the stack, and the book's not there. Or the book is there, but pages have been ripped out. Or the book that I want is War and Peace, and Sandra realizes, I am carrying War and Peace in my bag, and if you had just told me what this data was, I had it already for you. So IPFS is this way of addressing content based on what it is. And when you put in IPFS to call out for your data, for your hash, it can come from anywhere in the network, not from this one location. So it solves that problem of when you go, you put in a web address and you get that 404 error. And I mean, IPFS stands for Interplanetary File System. And that sounds very lofty, but we are in fact at Filecoin Foundation working with Lockheed Martin to put IPFS into space to enable interplanetary communication, so that when we make the next leap to wherever we leap to next in this universe, you won't have to come back to Earth to retrieve data and then go back out. The world will, the universe will be able to communicate with each other using IPFS. So that's the quick and dirty on how the tech works. We are storing all kinds of People are storing all kinds of incredible data sets on the Filecoin network. This is a super rough breakdown on what's on the network now. I'm not sure if my stats are showing there because they're not showing for me here, but just some highlights. The Victor Chain Cardiac Research Institute, they're like a big group in Australia that's doing research on health. They're storing all their critical research data sets on the Filecoin network. The University of Utah is storing NASA geospatial data and climate data on the Filecoin network. This really amazing company called Generate that's doing all this genomics research, they're storing their data on the Filecoin network. One more, the Museum of Crypto Art. They're storing a whole archival copy of all of these digital artworks on the Filecoin network. So it is, every large data set, you can choose to store 3 copies on a large, AWS or Google Cloud. And/or you can choose to store it on this decentralized, robust, resilient network. And I don't see them as an either/or. I see it at this moment as a both/and. There's a really valuable case to be made for putting copies of your data on the Filecoin network and trying out this decentralized technology for yourself. So in addition to the storage providers and the storage clients, we also have thousands of developers around the world who are either they're building tools and using Filecoin for the back-end storage, or they're building tools that make it easier for you to on-ramp onto the network. So my wonderful colleague, Jacob, created a demo of something called the Capture app. Let's see if I can play it for you here. Okay, so Jacob took a photo of his mantle at home. This is an app you can download at home for free on any phone. And what you see is he took this photo, and at the top it now says that it's registering this to the blockchain, to the Numbers Protocol blockchain. This is a different blockchain than what Filecoin uses, but they are using Filecoin and IPFS on the back end for storage. So you see at the top that it's registering and that it was registered to the blockchain successfully. Then Jacob goes and he clicks on this photo that he just took. And as you scroll down, you can see all of the metadata that was captured by this photo that he took. If he wanted to, he could immediately mint that into a beautiful NFT. But also you see, if you scroll down, that this is given an IPFS hash. So Jacob's going to take that hash. He copied it to his clipboard. He's going over to his web browser. You post that in, and you can pull up the file. So what we're showing here is this is an app that anybody can use, and you can use it for all kinds of things, but at its like most basic core, every photo that you take is given an IPFS hash that then anybody can access with that hash. And why is this important? Well, it's being used not just to mint NFTs, but it's being used for citizen journalism and in these major archival efforts. So the next thing that I'll show you is a demo from a group called Starling, but Starling is using the Capture app to document war crimes testimonies all over the world. And they're doing it with this iPhone app that anybody can download. And they're going out into places. They go to Syria, they go to Ukraine, they capture testimonies. And why it's important that they're using this app and not just like recording on their iPhone and then going and storing it on Filecoin is that there's this very clear chain of custody. So you know that the second that that video or photo is taken, it hasn't been manipulated. And if it is, then that IPFS hash breaks and it's not accessible anymore. So here's a video I want to play from the Starling Lab, and I will end with this. This is a guy named Jonathan Doughton. He is incredibly brilliant and a force of nature. He's at Stanford, and he went out to the USC Shoah Foundation, which has an archive of 55,000 genocide survivor testimonies. And he said, where are you storing them? And they said, we're storing them on a big storage provider. And Jonathan said, why don't we store a copy on Filecoin, just as a backup, just in case. And so they did. They put a copy on the Filecoin network successfully. They built all kinds of tools that have made it even easier to upload. And then Jonathan and his team have gone out and have made partnerships with Reuters and other news agencies. And they're all around the world capturing. They have a 3-part system: capturing, verifying, and storing data on the Filecoin network. So let's hear directly from Jonathan.
Today, a picture is worth so much more than 1,000 words. A single image can unleash an unlimited number of retweets and likes and views that surround us and propel our reality. Together, all these digital bits, they come together to form the collective memory of our civilization. And some of those memories are inspiring and effortless to preserve. But some, they ache. There are difficult memories that some would rather forget or ignore, or even deny. As everything becomes digital, what are we doing to preserve the integrity of these vulnerable memories? Memories that could be lost to time and also overwhelmed with hate.
In a time of manipulated speech and fake news and deepfakes, when you put this content out into the digital world, it is completely vulnerable. It also enables those who want to deny it a chance to manipulate it, to change it, to alter it, to retell that story.
And as a result, we have a lot of noise and misinformation, and the potential to sow confusion, hatred, and even conflict.
If you can't trust the images, the video, the audio that you're seeing, how do we agree on the facts? And if we can't agree on the facts, then we can't make decisions.
As we speak, the internet's evolving. We want to do our part to make sure that the innovations that are being developed are moving towards a good cause.
That's the challenge that motivated us to create the Starling Framework for Data Integrity. It's a joint program between the USC Shoah Foundation and the Stanford Department of Electrical Engineering. We're using the latest cryptography and decentralized web protocols to design and build tools as well as ethics that help restore trust in digital media. We've convened a wide array of academics and companies and NGOs from around the world to protect human rights and to ensure the integrity of data at each step as you capture, store, and verify human history. We're creating a new archive for the new decentralized web. All you need to do to participate is have one of these, a mobile phone.
Thank you. So that's Filecoin in action. And yes, I hope that I have changed some hearts and minds today.
Today,
Hey, my name is Neil Wasserman. I teach blockchain at George Washington University, and I follow Sandra's orders in bringing clarity to the standards world in the blockchain area. And with the authority invested in me, I'm going to ask you all to stand up and take a stretch. Okay, you've done that very well. Thank you. Now, wait, keep standing, keep standing. I want you all to stretch in the following way. Just put your arms out like this, raise them, rotate them a little bit like that. And I'm sure you're all feeling good. And you should feel good because you have just reduced the entropy in our system. You've achieved consensus, and it was a beautiful sight to see. And that's what I want to really talk about today, is the need to bring order out of chaos. And blockchain has, in the Dickens formulation, has seen the best of times, and it has also seen the worst of times. AI is sucking all the air out of the innovation world, and blockchain is I think very relevant to the AI world, but it's kind of now become just a little less visible than it was in the past. Technology goes through cycles, and I'd like to discuss some of these properties of the technology cycles, but understand how innovation emerges out of a kind of chaotic environment like we saw when you stretched randomly, and how we might need to find ways of bringing clarity and order to this chaotic world. And blockchain, AI, standards, governance reduces the entropy of the system, and I think that is a good thing. And I'd like to just talk about how that happens and how it applies to disaster risk reduction, which is kind of the issue that is maybe even a little bit more important than the efficiency of financial transactions, as important as that is. So we see IT as kind of an existential threat in some ways. AI is presenting issues that can create armies of uncontrolled robots that will wipe humanity from the face of the earth. At least that is the image that some people have. But we might also view IT as an existential solution, that it presents properties that can not only address the AI challenges, but may address challenges that we face in terms of disaster risk issues that are becoming more and more prevalent in the world as climate change is upon us. And I know you enjoyed the good weather today, but when the weather rises to 95 degrees in December, you might question the virtue of that experience. But the important thing is to think about, in the Senate environment, what is the appropriate policy response that we should bring to this situation? And the Executive Office of the President recently came out with a statement on AI, which was really quite detailed. It set timeframes and agency mandates, in the area of AI and the risks that are associated with AI. And I'd just like to ask the question, what should be the equivalent in the blockchain world? We don't have an answer to that, but I ask all of the Senate people that might be listening to what we're talking about today to think about what the parallel would be in the blockchain world, and maybe how blockchain can help with some of the AI risks that we're confronting. So I just want to start by giving a little bit of an overview of what's happening at GW, because I think it's an example of what can occur in terms of interdisciplinary collaboration and interaction that I think will be required to address many of these problems. We have a blockchain program, a small blockchain program that involves a course in blockchain and research activity in the blockchain area. Also cybersecurity research. The director of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Research Institute is with us today, Kostas Torregas. That is itself an integrative program at GW. We also have a very large NSF-sponsored program called Trustworthy AI, which is looking at the risks and opportunities associated with AI and the legal interfaces. And GW provides a platform in which you can look at law and policy and the international implications of these issues that emerge from AI and blockchain, other technologies. And we also have a program that has become, in a small way, international in scope. On technology and disaster risk reduction, and it brings together a number of disciplinary units at GW, but also connects with people in Latin America, in Europe, in other areas to address the opportunities that various technologies like AI and blockchain can apply to disaster risk reduction issues. And we've come out with some publications and conference participation and other outputs, but we invite you to join us in that activity because we want to extend this community of interest to be more effective on a global basis. So I want to just turn to this issue of technology evolution and just think about the similarities that we're confronting in blockchain. As I see it, and let me just paint a sound picture for you. How many of you have seen 2001: Space Odyssey? That begins with this very low note and clattering timpani and brass emerging. That's chaos, right? And then it all of a sudden explodes into this beautiful Strauss waltz with in deep space. And that's kind of the order that we might see as technology evolves. And we see a tension between this chaos and order that exists in terms of how technology works, but also how regulatory processes work. So we see technologies like blockchain and Google search and Krispy Kreme emerge from this innovative, chaotic environment, and we also see that sometimes metastasize into brainworms and Instagram that occupy our children's attention and presents maybe some risks. And that presents a need for maybe a look at what kind of order and constraint should be applied to these technologies as they become more ubiquitous in the world. So there's this tension between free innovation, where there's a cost of choice, that is, we have so much choice and churn in this environment that it's difficult to sometimes gain control over what is happening. But we also have the opportunity for standards, regulation, and law to bring order to this, to constrain the way that these technologies evolve. And there's a cost of constraint. So there's a balance between the cost of choice and the cost of constraint. We've seen this in the currency area. We once had barter and seashells, and now we have, beginning with the Coin Act of 1792, a standard dollar, which brings order to the currency world, and blockchain with platforms like Bitcoin and Ethereum and Hyperledger and the diverse set of blockchain entities, we see emerging from blockchain some efforts in terms of the standards world, IEEE and ISO and NIST, to bring some order to this world so that there can be interoperability among different blockchain environments and maybe interoperability for data exchange that blockchain environments facilitate. One way of understanding the application of blockchain to disaster risk management that I've been focusing attention on is developing a kind of architecture for disaster risk management in the same way that we develop architectures for the blockchain world. And at the bottom, we have a disaster risk reduction infrastructure of data, communications, the facilities that are at the foundation of disaster response, and we have kind of disaster risk reduction operating systems, processes of mitigation and response and recovery, and we have standards built on that. You know, how do we communicate in a standard way in response to disaster issues? And we have applications that may be built on that, some of which may be facilitated by blockchain. And on top of all of that, we have governance issues. You know, what are the rules of behavior that would govern disaster response and disaster initiatives so that we can have interoperability among the data systems that are necessary to support disaster response and prediction of vulnerabilities that may inform how we provide resources to different areas. And one way of thinking about the efficacy of these architectures is, you know, how does an architecture reduce entropy in the system? And we want to be able, in the disaster response world, as in many other worlds, to be able to have efficient decision-making mechanisms so that if you have a disaster that occurs with a chaotic emergency set of requirements, that it's necessary to be able to make decisions in a rather efficient way. And one of the ways that this entropy, the disorder of information, is constrained is by standards and governance, and that's why I participate in the standards initiatives for blockchain. But consensus processes, blockchain is an entropy-reducing technology, a very powerful entropy-reducing technology because it allows for consensus among distributed systems and concurrence of the models for transactions and smart contracts and data. I mean, it's a very powerful way of constraining the randomness and uncertainty that may be otherwise associated with these environments. Other techniques for entropy reduction, AI-based data analytics, search engines. The fact, Google is successful because it reduces the entropy, the indecisiveness that you would otherwise confront in finding what you want in the information world. And finally, network effects to synchronize behaviors among different entities that may be needed to cooperate to address disaster challenges. So one of the ways of looking at disaster risk reduction, and I know you're probably not immersed in this field, there's a Sendai process that was developed under the UN rubric that broadened the time scale associated with disaster risk reduction. So instead of just right away, okay, a disaster, earthquake, we send resources to Haiti or central Italy or wherever the earthquake occurred, we need to look at how can the infrastructure be hardened to minimize the effects of disaster, how can recovery processes be standardized. And there are many ways of using blockchain applications to address these needs at all four phases of the disaster risk reduction environment. That blockchain applications involving asset registration, just identifying people, tracking deployment of funds can have important impact on disaster risk reduction capabilities, but providing a health data infrastructure that can respond in efficient ways to the health needs under trying conditions. And I could talk for a long time about this, but I am trying to stay within my 15-minute constraint, which is, again, reducing the entropy of our environment. One of the outputs of this activity is creating a model for a blockchain-based data access environment for disaster risk reduction. And again, one of the challenges in the disaster risk reduction area is that we have a very diverse set of data sources: health data and infrastructure data, transportation data, communications data. How can these highly diverse set of data sources be integrated in a way and have a kind of supply chain of data that can be applied in an efficient way to disaster risk reduction needs? And again, we're moving on the left of that screen from a high entropy environment where we have a diverse set of data to a low entropy environment where we have trusted data that can be used for a specific purpose. So I want to just bring you towards a way of thinking about our futures, because I think if we think about the catastrophes that are occurring in the world today, and it's very tragic what is happening in the Middle East, and it's very tragic what happened with the last pandemic, we've had instances that challenge our human sensibilities to basically care for our fellow human beings. But the time scale, if we extend the time scale into the future, I think we can see these instances of catastrophe as really minor blips on what we are facing in the future. That climate change is going to create mass migrations on a scale that we haven't seen, food insecurity on a scale that we haven't seen. I think it's 40% of the world's population lives within, I don't know, a couple of tens of miles of coastline. As oceans rise, where all these populations are threatened. So instead of dealing with tens of thousands of people tragically affected in the Middle East now, we'll be dealing with tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. So I think we all have to think more creatively about how to apply technologies to address these possible futures. And I see three areas of attention that I hope we can bring to bear to these problems. One is value transparency. How do we identify our values in terms of geography? Do we care about our local population, or do we care about populations at a far geography? What is the values with respect to time scale? Do we care about what happens in the next 5 years in our investment portfolio, or do we care about what happens 2 generations into the future? What are the values that we apply to the decisions that we make in allocating resources? The second opportunity, I think, is systems architecture. How do we think of response in a systems framework so that we can focus resources and attention and testing processes and technologies like blockchain to have maximum impact on what we're trying to achieve? And finally, this entropy reduction viewpoint, how can we use blockchain and other models of behaviors to synchronize our actions so that the decision-making uncertainty is reduced and our collaborative processes are coordinated in a way that produces enhanced trust in our systems. So by way of conclusion, I think we need to understand that problem solving at scale needs clarity and order. And we have to think about how to apply blockchain, AI standards, and governance to all of these needs. And I think if you look inside and understand really what your values are, what the framework for making value-based decisions might be, we'll be able to face these existential risks in a much more coherent, successful, and way that's satisfying to everyone who participates in this process. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Here we go. So thank you, Sandra. Thank you, GBBC. My name is Matt Keller. I work with the Algorand Foundation. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who's spoken before me. So many people have said so many interesting things so well that, as Sandra said in the beginning, we need to get to scale on some of this. And when you listen to what people say, you wonder, why aren't we there already? Because the efficacy and the value, as Dale outlined so eloquently as the first speaker, is so crystal clear to me that you know that it's inevitable. You're listening to you, Lucian, and you know that the inevitability is there. And hopefully this use case I'm going to present makes that even clearer. So just a little quick background on Algorand. It started in about 2017 by Professor Silvio Macaulay at MIT. He's a Turing Award winner, and basically surveyed the landscape at the time, and Bitcoin was the predominant layer one, which was hugely energy consumptive, and wondered, could there be another way to build a layer one that was not so energy consumptive, that had sustainability and greenness kind of as part of its DNA, and so developed something called the Pure Proof of Stake protocol, which is what Algorand is, and we have been around for about 6 years now. I'm with the Algorand Foundation. And the functionality of, just very quickly, I won't go into details, 0.001 algos per transaction, 10,000 transactions per second, no downtime. Security is extraordinary. And again, as I said, the low energy consumption piece was a game changer at the time. It's no longer novel, but at the time it was, and a lot of layer ones that have come subsequent to that kind of copied that protocol. So what we do, and because that sustainability element is part of our DNA, we focus a lot on impact, on what can we do, what can we invest in that makes a difference in a few areas of specificity. One is financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is this broad term, but if you think about the details, 1.7 billion people in the world are unbanked. That means they have no access to banking institutions or their services. Environmental sustainability. What is it about this technology that can expand and expedite the use of, for example, carbon credits and other things that have not been very effective in the past, but because of the proof of provenance that was talked about earlier regarding how blockchain can work, some of those things can be made better. Social impact is another example, which is kind of social impact writ large. We've invested in a company out of Ireland called AidTech that has built, to your point, Professor, a disaster wallet, a survivor's wallet, so that when disaster strikes, you've got a wallet that is connected with various aid organizations, the Red Cross, St. Vincent de Paul Society, National VOAD, and others. And the resources that you need are delivered relatively instantaneously. And I say relatively instantaneously because right now, when you look at the disaster relief efforts in the United States, it's actually, and I learned about this in the last year because we invested in this company, it's kind of mind-boggling. A disaster hits, and it's between like 9 and 18 months you wait before you get the relief that you need. I mean, it's almost a paper-based system based on Excel spreadsheets. It's unbelievable. So we've invested in the Care Wallet. We're going to pilot that in Florida in the first quarter of 24. What does that mean? It means that aid is delivered fast. It means that transactions are on chain. They're indelible. They're immutable. Every granting organization can see every payment made, and the efficacy of it is going to blow away what exists now. And so how do we attain those? We do, we kind of engage in thought leadership. We're holding an impact summit in India, November 30th and December 1st, focused exclusively on how does blockchain enable entrepreneurs and others building for financial inclusion, social impact, and environmental sustainability. And when you look at it, there are a lot of people out there doing this. And so we're doing that. We have this buildable hackathon where impact is a significant track. We engage particularly in West Africa, and we're expanding our partnerships for humanitarian and disaster aid relief. So the case study I wanted to talk a little bit about and it's a company that we invested in Afghanistan, kind of backed up by a report done by the London School of Economics, is a case study in payments, cash-based assistance by a company called Hisab Pay. And I got really, when I started at Algorand, I was really interested in this. We found these guys and had extensive talks with them. I'd spent time in Afghanistan in 2010 and 11 working on a technology project out of the MIT Media Lab called One Laptop Per Child, which was a kind of big deal at the time. It failed in many ways, it succeeded in many ways, but we were trying to get literally every child in Afghanistan a connected laptop. And I worked very closely with General McChrystal on the funding part of that, and it didn't work out, but I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned from McChrystal was that 100% of the Afghani Defense Forces were illiterate. 100% were illiterate. And you look at those stats and some of the police stats and some of the societal stats on access to food, access to education, literacy rates. Even back then, you thought this is a crisis waiting to happen. And sure enough, a couple of years ago, that crisis began to take shape in a profound and disturbing way. And so if you look at the numbers, 97% of the people in Afghanistan live below the poverty level. Almost 20 million people are in danger of food insecurity. That's half the population. Roughly 5 million children face severe hunger and prolonged malnutrition, which results in stunting, which is a lifelong malady that can really never be overcome. I spent a number of years working with the United Nations World Food Program, and one of the things you see in many places is when you lack those micronutrients as a child, the rest of your life is determined as a result. So Afghanistan is imploding. It simply is. Sanctions, frozen assets, a paralyzed banking sector, and a real shortage of physical currency, and currency which exists is damaged beyond use, is prevalent. Lack of trust, lack of access. There are 27 million phones in Afghanistan. There are 9 million smartphones, which is not surprising, given the growing ubiquity of smartphones in much of the developing world, whether you're in rural Rwanda, or rural Afghanistan, or Ethiopia, or any of the places I've worked in my life, the growing use of smartphones is real, as we all know. Lack of access is a major issue. So Hisab Pay is a payments-based company that really works with the United Nations and other aid agencies to transfer value, money, from point A to point B across the Algorand blockchain rails. And, it works by digitizing the Afghan fiat currency based on fiat deposits, and they settle those transactions on the Algorand blockchain. And so what's happening is that because there's a failed banking infrastructure and because only 6% of the population has access to any bank anyway, something is taking its place. There's a void that's being filled here, and it's being filled by these digital payment infrastructures, which we support, Hisab Pay being the biggest one. So it's a multi-chain payment solution. It's instant fund transfers, bill payments, merchant payments. People spend a few cents here and a few cents there to get airtime minutes. They spend a few more cents for rated electricity that times out at a certain time. They spend a few more cents, all done from their phone in this case. They can also use QR codes. And what's happening is merchants are more and more accepting the digital currency because that's the only game in town. So the digital currency is being accepted now by over 1,500 merchants, largely in cities, Kandahar, Kabul, but growing to rural parts of the country as well. So people pay their electricity bills via the phone or a QR code. People explain, they go out, the staff goes out and explains to people, how this works. Let's see, I had a video here. You can play it.
Yes, you're good at...
Whoop. Let's see.
your job, but your processes though. With money.com.
All right, that's not it. Anyway, the the video shows, and what's I think particularly important is hang on here. Let me X out of this. Anyway, the video shows what's particularly important is that there are women who come out with their phones and get trained in various places in Kabul and Kandahar, again, in metropolitan areas, where they are taught how to use the applications. And it's a very quick process. So you have Hesab Pay staff in 34 different offices around the country who are charged with disseminating the application both virtually and in real time. And so what happens over time, and this started only a couple of years ago, you've got hundreds of thousands of people now who have availed themselves of this application. And so what that means is that you have the beginning of a movement that is going to get to scale relatively soon. And so what does that mean for direct aid in Afghanistan when over 90%, 97% unemployment, okay? So the only game in town is receiving cash assistance and in-kind assistance from United Nations agencies. So what, for example, the World Food Program does in Afghanistan is when they have cash disbursements, they call them events. People all come together and they get stuff. They get cash. They get in-kind contributions. And so what the London School of Economics did, supported by the Open Society Foundation, was they did a randomized controlled trial of 2,500 women. They followed them for 7 months, and they found several extraordinary things happened. When women received payment via the Hesab Pay app, they were more likely to spend it on their families. There were fewer skipped meals. There was less theft. There was less corruption, okay? And maybe most importantly, there was less violence against women as they came from these events where they were handed cash, hard cash, big wads of bills, walking through the streets, and where that was taken from them. That no longer happens as a result of this platform. Every contribution is indelibly recorded on chain. It's seamless, it's secure, and it's secure because it's decentralized, and it's decentralized, which makes it secure, which means it can scale. And so what we're going to do in the coming year is focus on payments as part of our impact emphasis. We are going to work with Hesab Pay in Syria, hopefully in Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, Libya. Think about places where the banking infrastructure has been kind of torn apart, where people don't have access to those services. And the question is, how can we help them get this to scale? And we think it'll happen. The United Nations World Food Program, again, is just finishing a pilot of 5,000 families. They are extending that to 125,000 families in 2024. What you're going to see is that's going to happen, as the London School of Economics report indicates, because the cost savings is so great by using these platforms, and because the threat of violence is limited as a result, and because there are fewer skipped meals, and because there is less corruption, and because every agency knows where every single dollar ends up, this is the future of delivery, of aid assistance delivery. So that's the case study. You know, we're really proud of that. We are going to have them at a big part of our Impact Summit in India. The founder, Sanzar Kakar, is half Afghani, half American, lives in Dubai, travels to Afghanistan and works with the Taliban government, which one has to do. And it has been a success that has surpassed my greatest hopes when we looked at these guys a little over a year ago. And, you know, I'll close. I know, Professor, you're talking about the future and, you know, the calamities that will certainly occur, particularly when it comes to climate change and other things. But, you know, I look at some of these entrepreneurs like Sanzar who developed Hesab Pay, and, you know, others that we invested in, whether they're from Zimbabwe or from Latin America, tokenizing behavioral change when it comes to public transportation choices. You know, these are people who are building for a future using technology that is available right now, that is having a profound impact in many parts of the world. and will have a profound impact in many parts of the world as time goes by. So I look at these entrepreneurs like Sanzar, and I think to myself that, I'm optimistic, because technology, as you all know, is morally neutral. How do you use it? What do you use it for? You can use a phone to blow up a building, or you can use a phone to give health advice 7,000 miles away. And so I look at these people, and I'm lucky to be at a foundation where impact is the core of what we do, and that impact translates into real change for the most marginalized people on earth. Thank you.
And a lot of strong personalities, and it reminds me, we're talking a little bit about technology here, so it reminds me of something that happened. I'm dating myself by telling you this, but I was on the Hill when the visitor center, the new visitor center opened, and we were moving, we have a skip space, and we were moving from one skip space down to our new offices in the Capitol Visitor Center, and we had new equipment down there. And so one night, I'm in the spaces late at night, and a couple staffers were around and sharing the space. And of course, we dealt with classified information all the time. And so I'm in we have a big shredder, industrial kind of shredder, and I'm in the shredder room, and the chairman walks into this piece of paper. And he's looking at the shredder. And I go up to him and I say, Mr. Chairman, is there something I can help you with? And he says, yeah, I don't know how to work this thing. And I said, well, okay, I'll help you out. So I take the paper from him and I start feeding it into the shredder. And he says, that's great, Mark. I only need 2 copies. So technology can be complicated, especially in your environment. Got to get back to the presentation here. I don't know what happened.
We have technical difficulties.
So as we get started, I want you to keep in mind 2 things. And I hate being trapped behind a podium, by the way, but the things that I'd like you to keep in mind as we talk for the next 15 minutes is, as things mature, there are growing pains. I challenge anybody to tell me something of which that is not true. People, technology, organizations, so keep that in the back of your noodle. And the second thing is that discovery is irrevocable. We have this need to progress and to make things better. So once you discover something, that's it. We cannot put the genie back in the bottle. So as all technologies mature, there's a couple things that happen with all of them about the growing phase. One, there are initial limitations, features, for example, with tech, and usability. Any developers in the room? So you understand, sometimes you're focused more on functionality than on usability. So sometimes that's a problem, but as they mature, as those growing pains subside, you get better usability.
You guys broke this. I'll get it fixed.
There's a scalability problem. Obviously, the more people use it, the more it's got to be able to scale accordingly. Interoperability with existing technologies. Cost reduction, the more it's used, the more drive those costs down, so it's not as expensive for each of the people to get the benefits. And of course, we kind of talked a lot about this today. Education, people don't know how to use it. You got to show them what the benefit is. So we've seen this. Think about when the internet first came around. We had usability issues. We had the same growing pains with the internet. And then mobile phones. Remember the movies with the very big bricks. Battery life, you had we talk about all-day batteries today with smartphones. Back in the day, we were like, hey, I can get 2 phone calls with this battery, and then it's dead. So, perfect, that's the right slide. Thank you very much. So, if you can read this in the eye chart in the back of the room, we have growing pains too. And just take a look at those growing pains. But these growing pains are common, They're necessary, and of course, they drive innovation in and of themselves. And discovery is irrevocable. There's been controversies around cryptocurrency, but note those controversies and a couple of statistics. So in October, the assets under management for digital asset products grew by 6.5%, more than 6.5%, to a total of $31.7 billion. The average daily aggregate volumes of digital asset investment, that's grown by almost 45% to 230 million, and the United States still leads with a market share of about 77%. That's about $24.5 billion. So these growing pains, it's clear that despite the growing pains, that there's interest and this technology is irrevocable, meaning there's no going back. Now, we can, especially standing here on Capitol Hill, I could get into, and I'll talk about this in a second, we can talk about regulation of Web3 and crypto, but I often, whenever I have a conversation with a representative or a senator, and they say, what about this, what about that? I say, all great questions, all important questions, all must be dealt with, but the fact is, look at the growth. Look at the interest. So I always say that it means that we have to get that regulation right because there's such strong interest in this. Discovery is irrevocable. So I want to point out just real briefly that I think that in this town, we talk about regulation in a homogeneous manner. We talk about Web3 and Web3 regulation in a homogeneous manner, which we should not do. Because there's money crypto, and very important, obviously, KYC, AML, all those things need to be addressed. But here's what we're talking about here today. There's a technology that cannot be put back in the bottle. And that's what we should be talking about more than the crypto. But the crypto applications are important, and I mean, obviously, I work for a company that we have the world's most popular digital wallet, MetaMask, so it's critical. But when it comes to regulation, regulate the finance with one mindset, regulate the technology with another. Just real quick about consensus. I won't bore you with all of the mission and things like that, but what we're trying to do is empower people and communities. You've heard a little bit about that today. What other industry is that interested in societal well-being? I mean, I spent 2 careers in the national security realm, and of course we're interested in security, and that's somewhat related to well-being, but we spend an awful lot of time talking about bomb damage assessments and blast radiuses and targeting packages rather than how do we make society better. In 1996, there was a great book by Francis Fukuyama, and it's called Trust, and that book says the well-being of any society is dependent on the primary social characteristic of inherent social trust. And I argue that Web3 is a new foundation of societal trust. And I like it just because I spent a lot of time at the National Security Agency as well, and that math was everything to us. If I couldn't prove it mathematically, it probably didn't exist. And so I love cryptographic primitives. I love the cryptology in Web3 and in crypto. So that's pretty much our mission at Consensus. Just because I'm going to be talking about wallets in general, I just wanted to introduce you quickly to the fact that we have a digital wallet, we have the infrastructure on which to develop other, not only cryptographic primitives, but also products, and we've got a way to deploy it with a new L2 called Linea. We've got over 20 million monthly active users for a wallet that's about 7 years old. More than 500,000 developers working, obviously, on Ethereum. We didn't launch Linea that long ago, and I've just been a little surprised at how quickly it's growing. So you can see the users of MetaMask. the monthly active users at over 20 million, and almost all of our users are in the United States. Goes back to my point about, is there any ignoring of this technology? And I submit that there is not. You can just see some use cases. You've heard about much more dramatic use cases, but some of the ways that we talk about MetaMask is in the ability to move and store NFTs, obviously DeFi applications, metaverse applications, and AI, which I'll touch on briefly. The core of what I wanted to talk about, because what we're trying to do is solve societal problems, is a thing called MetaMask Snaps. Think of, you need a gateway to Web3, and your wallet is your gateway, a common interface. And Snaps extends that interface, and there's lots of analogies I could use, but one thing that I wanted to share, that at the intersection of everything that happens at Web3 is the wallet. What am I talking about? Devices, distributed applications, assets, NFTs, users, developers. You can all say that the wallet is the center of gravity there. That digital wallet, it's the common interface. I do not believe that one size fits all with wallets, by the way. I mean, I have my preferences, obviously, but that does not mean that there's not room for other wallets. But I'll make the case for MetaMask Snaps. I'm not going to play that right now because of the problems we had before, but let me just talk about Snaps real quick. When builders and users are aligned with common incentives and their ability to contribute to an ecosystem together, that's very empowering. And when you have that kind of power, you've got a lot of good self-governance there. I think of Snaps as somewhat of an expression of creativity and empowerment. Think of the wallet as your universal Web3 interface, empowering developers to bring innovation to wallets. But the Snaps that's a platform to enable developers to build features to customize the wallet experience. And what am I driving towards there? There's a flywheel here that if I've given you a blank piece of paper, but I've given you no access to write on it, well, what good is that? So what we've done is we've got a blank piece of paper, which is your wallet, configured however you want it, and now I've handed developers a keyboard or a pencil, and they can build things that you can decide, you know what, I want that on my piece of paper. So that common interface, that common gateway to Web3, we've given you almost, I can't come up with a limit yet, but it's almost an unlimited power to extend your wallet to whatever it is you think is necessary. Snaps. The categories of snaps you can see on the list here, and think back to what I said, that there are growing pains. I showed you some growing pains in the Web3 space. Think of interoperability. We've got a number of snaps that enable you to now do what was undoable before, meaning if you had a MetaMask wallet, you're transacting on Ethereum. That's it. Now, you can use a snap if you want, put it into your wallet, and now you can trade with any L1 that you want. So there was the problem of, oh, look, it's limited. Well, now it's not. Transaction insights. This is something that we have not yet spoken to policymakers about this, but transactions insights, you can see security is different from transaction insights, but I do think of them as somewhat of the same. I can now I can prepare to send money to somebody else's digital wallet, and this snap will come back and say, are you sure? That digital wallet that you're about to send those funds to, they've been involved in an awful lot of spoofs and crime or illicit transactions, what have you, and you can decide, well, yeah, I want to go ahead or I won't. And there are multiple snaps that are doing this. So let's say there's, I won't bore you with the video of the demo, but there's an example where you want to do that transaction and one of your snaps says, oh, yeah, you shouldn't do it. Okay. I can go to another snap and see what that snap thinks about that transaction. By the way, all of the snaps that we have, none of them have ever disagreed. So to me, that's statistically significant. Notifications, we can get notifications from different networks. There's some privacy snaps, there's identity snaps. Dale, you talked earlier, what a great example that you mentioned. You said the story of Sandra. And I won't take a lot of time to get into this now. I mean, what I'm about to say, we could talk for months on this. But the idea that you now walk into the information space with a social graph that's documentable, that you can contribute to someone else's reputation, or someone can contribute to yours, or think about, you could be a member of a group, like a LinkedIn group or something, and you can decide to join, you can decide to cut it off, and the security and the identity applications that are being built allow you to do that. You carry your whole world with you, and people can know about you or not, depending on what you think is right. I do think, I mean, I've bought into the entire Web3 idea that now an intermediary doesn't get to control my data, I get to control my data. And so this is, the identity snaps are some of the things that enable you to do that. Security is obviously key for those of us who are nerds. Snaps run in a sandbox. So you get to set the configurations as to how much information is shared with the snap and how much Snap gets to share information with others. They're all audited, and we're going through a process to decentralize that audit process. Right now, we do it in-house, and we have some third parties doing it, but the idea is that eventually it'll be like open source, and everybody can contribute to that. Just real quick, because we've spent a lot of time talking about it already, there is a wonderful merger between AI and Web3. One thing that does concern me, I'll be a little controversial and say, if AI is captured by centralized parties in the same way that the internet was captured by centralized parties, that is very, very dangerous, in my opinion. We already have trouble knowing, well, what's the truth? Well, what should I believe? If there's capture of AI, then you'll never know. You'll never know. So I think that the merger between AI and decentralized protocols is critical. We need to make sure that no centralized areas of AI exist. Just to sum it up, in the beginning, I talked about growing pains. In Web3 and in crypto, there's the growing pains of scams, crypto fraud, illicit transactions. We not only have a wallet, but we have a way to add things to that wallet to prevent those things from happening. Tech complexity. Oh my gosh, I got to be a command line person if I'm going to work with Web3. Nope, you can point and click your way with your wallet and a number of snaps. I don't know where to begin. Well, there are tutorials for these snaps that'll help you know how to do that. Oh, it's too expensive. Well, especially with the Ethereum transition to proof of stake, reducing expenses on chain to by 98%, that's kind of taken care of. And oh, this isn't really innovative. It's kind of the same thing as Web 2. When you look at the identity snap and what I talked about, taking your entire persona or personas with you, that's taken care of too. All things mature. There are growing pains. And discovery is irrevocable. We all have that need to move forward in this space. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Heidi. I'm head of investment products for Wave Digital Assets. Thank you so much, Sandra, and the entire GBBC team for hosting this event and for inviting us. We are thrilled and honored to participate. Though I do have to say I'm probably going to be the little dark spot in the conversation today, as I'm going to be talking about bankruptcies and crime and what is being done with those crypto assets. So I think it was Albert Einstein that said something about technological progress is like an axe in the hands of a pathological criminal. And unfortunately, As much as we've seen wonderful innovation in this space and beautiful use cases, the criminals always seem to be a step or two ahead. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But before I go into that, let me give you just who we are at Wave, unless you've heard of us. Wave Digital Assets, we are one of the very few predominantly crypto and digital asset investment advisors that is also registered with the SEC. Yes, they actually do exist post FTX. There aren't very many of us, but there are a few. The firm started in Los Angeles. One of our co-founders was a VC, one of the few in Southern California, and he got exposed to Bitcoin early on. And then you probably remember in 2017, the ICO bubble took place in Los Angeles, and there were a lot of crypto whales that came out of that. Well, these crypto whales were holding on to crypto assets, and they wanted, like a wealth manager, somebody to help them with their crypto exposure, help them find better custodial solutions, generate yield, do something other than have it just sit there. So that was the impetus of Wave Digital Assets is, there's going to be a need to help people who've got crypto. But we want to do it the right way. We want to lean into regulation from day one. This journey has not been easy because, as you know, in the DNA of Web3, a lot of it is all about disintermediating and stepping outside of regulation. And we went the other way with the goal of being SEC registered. So we're very proud, and we take our SEC registration very seriously. Our bread and butter, I skipped there. I'm so excited to talk about us. So as taking part of the SEC taking that very seriously, I do have to let you know that anything I say here is not any kind of financial advice, but happy to talk with you after. Our bread and butter is that we work with some of the world's largest protocols. We help them manage their treasury, from anything from finding custodial solutions to helping them generate yield on their tokens or their other tokens that they might be holding. So that could be derivatives, staking, deploying into DeFi. And we also help to set up ecosystems as well. So if they're looking to launch a DeFi ecosystem, we could help them with that as well, with liquidity provisioning for that ecosystem. So I mentioned that because I wanted to just give a flavor of our deep involvement with Web3. We really interact, as I mentioned, with crypto whales and protocols, and we also have several private place funds. So these funds are Bitcoin derivatives, an NFT fund, a DeFi fund, early stage venture, and crypto index. Again, very, very Web3. We're trying to apply traditional financial instruments into the Web3 world. So as a result of this, I would say, and I wanted to introduce Cliff Kautsky, who's also in our room. Sorry, Cliff, he is new to our team as of March. He is helping spearhead our government relations initiative. So back in March, we hired Cliff. There was an opportunity that came, before we hired him, there was an opportunity that came our way. It was an SEC receivership. It was a small one. But there were these difficult to unwind tokens, and it was a crypto Ponzi scheme, so there were victims involved. And they came to Wave and said, we need to get rid of these tokens so we can help the victims be made whole as much as possible. It was really a problem for this receivership. Cliff at the time was working for a track and trace firm, and we were able to help this SEC receivership unwind their assets and make those victims whole. And we realized, wow, this is probably the beginning of a whole new, unfortunate industry in which there will be lots of bankruptcies, and we're assuming there's going to be a lot of government-seized assets. And sure enough, another opportunity came our way. It was a very large exchange, one of those headliners, and we also helped them unwind their digital assets and helped to make their clients whole as well. That was into the multiple millions. And so Cliff then joined our team, and since then we have been on a journey to connecting with numerous bankruptcies and speaking to government agencies. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of statistics about this, and this is more anecdotal of what we're experiencing, what we're seeing in the current industry today, and some possible solutions. So I think we're all aware of the headline bankruptcies. Obviously, well, I'll skip FTX for a second, but Genesis Global, which was an exchange, Celsius, which was a lender, Voyager, which is an exchange, Three Arrows Capital, which was a hedge fund, and Gemini Trust, which was an exchange, and then, of course, we all know FTX. One thing I do want to point out for those of you that are not native to Web3, all of these firms were centralized firms. So there are firms in this space that were practicing lending, which was decentralized finance, that were truly decentralized, and they did not have any failure issues. So that's something that I just wanted to point out. Unfortunately, the centralized, we call it CFI, centralized financial institutions, like many other types of cases in the past, were not open with their books, or there was not a lot of clarity in what was going on behind the scenes, and subsequently there were significant bankruptcies. So a lot of these bankruptcies they represent billions. We've looked at numbers anywhere 5 billion, 10 billion, 20 billion of assets and liabilities that these firms collectively represented. And this led to what we call the crypto winter, where the market has lost over 2 trillion in estimated value. Some of the tokens lost up to 100% in value. And perhaps even more important, there were over 1.5 million creditors and investors that are not going to be made whole. Perhaps they've lost their life savings or are still waiting, and that because their assets are frozen at the time. And coming from this space, I saw that tremendous numbers of jobs that have been lost, how it's impacted companies as well. They might not have gone bankrupt, but the impact on companies has been very painful and severe. And then also just the reputation of crypto and unfortunately blockchain and Web3 and NFTs, they all got rolled up into one. So there has been quite a bit of pain as a result of that. The crypto crime scene, this breaks my heart, because I got into blockchain to help improve the world. And as Cliff and I have been meeting with more government agencies, it's almost like that veil has been lifted, and to see how much the criminals are utilizing crypto is heartbreaking. Of course, they use dollars, so it's not crypto's fault, but and again, I don't understand why they use crypto, because we can track the crypto, but they are. And I want to say credit Chainalysis for this information. We're seeing such an increase in crypto-related crimes. You can see back in 2017, there was only roughly about 5 billion of seized assets, and now this past year was over 20 billion. And a lot of that is coming from things like ransomware, money laundering, stolen funds, the darknet scams. Any kind of crime you can think of, there is crypto. Arms dealing, human trafficking, terrorism, drug dealing, it's there. So what this is now doing for government agencies is alerting government agencies of, okay, there is a tremendous opportunity / responsibility to seize these crypto assets. And we're seeing one of the IRS really being the leading investigative firm in this space in the world at the time. They've seized in 2022, 7 billion of assets, more than double in 2021, and I have a feeling they have probably more assets than that. But just anecdotally, Cliff and I have been speaking with government agencies, both in the United States, state level, federal level, and then also outside of the US. And a lot of the agencies are aware that the criminals are utilizing crypto, but they just don't have the education or the tools. So I think an opportunity is wonderful opportunity to work with GBBC or other organizations that help with education to help government agencies as they ramp up their investigative services. But if, for example, we spoke to a border state here in the US that has been seeing their treasury of caught fiat going down, And the reason, most likely, is because because criminals are utilizing crypto. So they are sitting on possibly, millions, hundreds of millions of potentially seized assets that they could get from the drug cartel. And unfortunately, because there's so much education on what is crypto, how do you seize it, how do you move it once you've seized it, how do you securely store it, and then the laws around it, they're just starting to get into this. And then Cliff and I have spoken to agencies around the world, and at the moment, they're also really starting to get into this. So this is the very, very beginning of this industry. So I will just, because this is the beginning, I will talk a little bit about some anecdotal issues that we're seeing in this space and possible solutions that a firm like maybe Wave or other firms could help. One of the things that we strongly believe, when assets are seized, it's important to know what those assets are. And unless you're in Web3, it could be very difficult. So, for example, if you could seize Bitcoin, but maybe the agency or maybe the receivership has it as well DeFi tokens and are unaware, okay, well, the DeFi token, I can't claw it back. If I claw it off of a smart contract, I'm actually going to be penalized with fees. And we actually did see that with one of the firms that were involved with a trustee. It wasn't a large amount, but they clawed back DeFi tokens, and they lost on the yields, and then they were penalized with fees. Or what do you do with NFTs and airdrops? These are kind of the unique nuances that you don't really see in traditional, either physical or other kinds of financial instruments that are seized. Other issues that have come up are, this is just, will make your stomach turn, is sometimes some agencies have admitted that, they don't know, they didn't know, so they might have seized an asset that was on a thumb drive, and on that thumb drive could have been sitting $1 million, $50 million plus worth of digital assets, and threw it in a drawer at some desk, not understanding that, if somebody else has the access codes and the keys, those assets can be swiped, and that has happened. So the question now is, and I think agencies are becoming more sophisticated that they just don't throw it in a drawer, but they're still out there. They're still maybe holding on to it themselves, or not fully understanding that, okay, you should maybe custody it with a qualified custodian that has insurance. There's a lot of, again, nuances with custody as well. Another area that we have been discovering is disposal and liquidity of those assets. That's not really as easy as just going on to a US-based exchange and, trading those assets. What if you're sitting on $100 million worth of a token that is ranked maybe 50th, and you go to cash that? Well, you're going to really severely affect the market pricing of that. And that there has altercations afterwards for other people. So that's an issue. Or one thing that's really come up recently is agencies that have seized. Now criminals are starting to catch on that, wow, you can track and trace Bitcoin and ETH. So they're starting to use privacy tokens. Well, here's a big problem. Governments are starting to seize privacy tokens, and how do we handle that? What if there was a victim involved? What if there was some sort of ransom and that victim had to pay in Monero, for example? Well, now how do you make that victim whole if we are not allowed to liquidate that token because that token may be considered contraband because it's a privacy token? And so these are some issues that actually are real life issues that we're speaking to government agencies, and there is no clarity at the moment. But that's a big one. As we see more criminals utilizing privacy tokens, there has to be some sort of solution for that. And then another one is returning assets to victims. If you've got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets, how do you return it? Do you return it in the underlying asset? Do you cash it out? Or do you put into stable coins? There's all of these, and then there are so many laws or no laws or clarity around that. One interesting thing on number 5 that we have found with a court-appointed bankruptcy trustee situation out of Europe. Some of you in this room may know that a lot of the bankruptcies, the fees have been so extremely exorbitant. The fees have been going to the law firms, consulting firms, investment banks. And while they are much needed, every time a penny or Satoshi or Sat goes to one of these firms, it's taken out of perhaps a creditor, debtor, or a victim's pocket. And these bills are tremendous sized bills. So an interesting thing came to us. This is out of Europe. This bankruptcy came to us and said, to help pay for these fees, maybe we could utilize staking. And staking is almost like a money market kind of account. Now, there's technology risk, but maybe the amount of money we would have cashed or the amount of crypto we would have cashed, maybe we could put that in staking, and then the yield that is generated help pay for legal fees and consulting fees and so forth. So this is something that we're also exploring. Last but not least, which I think is the most important, is education. We are really, we would love to join any organization like GBBC, but strongly believe that education is key. This is something that we are providing as a service. We recently hired Dr. David Uske, who came to us from one of the largest federal agencies where he led criminal investigations on the cyber side. And he's helping us put together curriculum for large agencies here in the US, and we're sharing that with any agencies outside of the US and also state level. We also have one of our co-founders, Benjamin Tsai, who is a crypto finance professor at UCLA Anderson School of Management for those who are getting a master's of financial engineering, and he teaches crypto finance. So we're putting together these education courses on once you've seized those assets, what do you do with them? And we're also partnering with some of the best-in-class crypto investigative firms and track and trace firms on, okay, this is how you seize it, this is what a wallet is, this is how you move assets around. So I've come to the conclusion of my presentation. I'm so sorry I have to go through all of these slides because these are all of the disclaimers that we have to put in all of our material. But I would like to put a call out there, and if anybody is interested in any kind of collaboration on education, we really strongly love what we're doing right now because we feel in our own small way, we are helping to get the bad guy and helping to clean up and keep our ecosystem afloat. So thank you so much for your time.
That's okay. So for those who don't know me, my name is Wes Geisenberger. I help lead the Sustainable Impact Fund at the HBAR Foundation. The HBAR Foundation is a grant-giving organization in the Hedera ecosystem. And I also serve as the chair for the Carbon Emissions Task Force as part of the IWA within the GBBC. For those who don't know, Hedera is a public layer 1 technology, very similar in a sense to some of the other technologies you heard from today. Proof of stake network. Has a low carbon footprint, but it's governed by some of the largest organizations in the world across industries and geographies. So folks like Google, Tata, IBM, Avery Dennison, ServiceNow, Electricité de France, and many of these organizations are pioneering use cases across the enterprise, but our network's open for anyone to build and drive change. And a lot of what we do is focused on digital public goods. And those digital public goods are enabling not only the use cases, but world-changing outcomes. And one of the things that we really think about at the foundation, as part of the Hedera ecosystem, is the balance sheet of the planet will live on the public ledger. So when I think about it from a carbon emissions task force perspective, that could be scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 emissions, product carbon footprints. We hear a lot about supply chain issues and assets having digital birth certificates. I know Dale talked a little about being able to track packages and understanding different elements about them. But what about the goods that we're consuming? Understanding not just the digital birth certificate, but maybe the amount of water consumed for that good, maybe the amount of carbon created with that good. We also think about markets where things like carbon offsets come into play. We may have water rights markets, renewable energy trading markets. And we think all of these assets need to be auditable and understand the different roles and actors involved in an audit trail, the data that's being produced, but that data needs to be understandable. It needs to be information that's discoverable. And if there is trading involved, say where you're offsetting a carbon emission, you need to be able to see the emission, the entire audit trail of the emission, the offset, and actually prove that those assets are real. And so we have 5 goals as part of our investment fund. When we announced the fund back in early last year, it was a $100 million fund. We wanted to support 5 goals as part of that fund. One is to make climate finance auditable, understand where money comes from, where it goes to. If we think about sustainable debt mechanisms in a multi-trillion-dollar green bond market, or the multi-billion-dollar the voluntary carbon market, or the compliance carbon market, which is growing and complemented by other things like biodiversity markets, which are already quite big in the compliance sense in the US, but growing voluntarily internationally. All those proceeds, we need to understand that they're following different rules, and the money is going to specific folks who are following those rules in a way that's trustworthy, that we can understand the outcome. And we can understand the outcome to the unit of value, such as a metric ton, a biodiversity area being improved or conserved, or maybe we're tracking and making sure our emissions are really following the right accounting rules. Because when we buy a product, we can't always see what pollution came out of it. When we buy a carbon credit, we may not know what happened halfway around the world and was it following a credible set of rules. Of course, we need to make sure that someone's not just putting that information on a blockchain or distributed ledger. We need to scale validation and verification for independent audits of those assets that are being created. Putting those rules out there on a public ledger is a good way to start, but making sure the data is following those rules is an important element of that. And when we have this data, we can create dynamic attributes. So we heard a lot about supply chain use cases today. We heard about financial tracing of funds and understanding how we may think about payments in the future. But we need to discover a global climate asset price where we understand the payment that's happening on chain for the real world asset. And that real world asset is backed up by an audit trail that follows rules. And so we're developing net new technologies, that open source infrastructure to enable that as part of our goals, as part of our investments, to put the infrastructure and application level, because these assets sit on company balance sheets. When we think about ESG reporting, oftentimes we hear questions about credibility. We hear questions about, well, is what I see in the annual report with the really nice pictures, is that really happening? Are we enabling this impact? And if we have those rules out there, if we have data out there that is tied to units of value on a public ledger that anyone can see and help trace, it gives us a much better chance to say, yes, that's in fact happening. And so as part of our investments of that open source infrastructure, we talked about the methodologies, those rule sets that we're following, and mapping actors who are producing data, whether it's a device or person or a third-party system. That all can be logged. A lot of times people talk about blockchain, and we talk about the logs of information that are stored. They're oftentimes small pieces of information that add up over time, where we need to prove the provenance of that information cryptographically. But if we have the rules out there and we can have deterministic rules, rules that are programs effectively, and codification of data, we can get to that unit of outcome. And so on Hedera, we have different systems that enable this, and I'm not going to get into today, but the open source tool that structures that data is called the Guardian. It's one of our biggest public investments in terms of infrastructure. The digital public good that anyone can use today. You don't have to talk to me, you don't have to talk to Hedera. You can start to use it to codify those rules, where we've already done so with actually the largest library of rules out there in the world for emissions tracking, voluntary carbon market assets, and many other rule sets are being defined even as we speak. And of course, the reason why folks are creating these rules is so they can develop environmental projects, develop emissions tracking, and create markets that can rationalize how an offset's happening in real time for an emission that's happening in real time. And the idea is, well, this has to be adopted, right? Where is this happening? So we have folks like ServiceNow, Fortune 500 organization, one of our governing council members. They're not only a stakeholder in helping govern the technology and the finance of Hedera, as well as set the technical roadmap, but they're actually using these tools and these open source tools on top of Hedera, called the Guardian, embedded within their platform, where you have Hedera as the layer 1, the Guardian as an API that you can access, and effectively structure the data of the rules and the data against those rules to get to the unit of outcome, where they have customers who are creating renewable energy certificates in Southeast Asia to do just that. And that maybe you say, hey, well, what about startups? How are we working with smaller organizations? We have folks who, if they want to get started, we had a developer put this together for a hackathon. One of our goals with the Guardian is in less than 2 weeks you can define these complex environmental rule sets in simplified views. And we took a process from Gold Standard to take an electrified cook stove and how they measure emission reductions through clean cooking. And we took all the different roles, laid them out, again, through this hackathon, through a single developer. And he was able to win the hackathon by codifying all these rules and get to a point where you can map every role, every actor, each piece of data being produced, cook stove, different parties involved, to get to what would be a metric ton in the case of a project. So if one developer can do this, and that can apply to people in the developing world who are using clean cooking as a way to not pollute as much, well, how does that really impact those communities? It's one of the things that we often think about in climate finance and voluntary carbon markets. Well, if we have the roles mapped out within the methodology, and those roles and actors who are fulfilling them are attesting to data, all of a sudden we can start to map the data flows that are coming, but we can also receive value in those accounts on public ledgers. And we've heard, in climate markets and carbon markets lately, about maybe that's an issue if the communities who are, making these changes in sustainable development, are they getting paid? That's a big question that we've heard from a climate justice perspective, or folks on Wall Street getting richer by funding these projects and paying someone a small piece of that carbon credit, and then making money selling it again and again. We don't even know if it's real every time. But if we put the rules out there, the data out there, and we can show the receipt of value into those accounts using tools like stablecoins, well, maybe we can actually answer the question, what percentage of funds went back to the community? What contractors involved in a carbon credit project, an independent verifier, a registry, the keeper of the rules, or a project developer, the folks who are the consultants helping make the project possible, what are they getting paid versus what is the community getting paid? Maybe we can actually answer the question of that percentage, or even how the community is using those funds, and are they traceable? Does that add value to the project? And so the Guardian helps structure that data. But we have native on-ledger payment processes that actually show how that's remitting. And so Tollamirth, one of the marketplaces on Hedera, is working to make that an attribute in the markets. Now, they're also developing a price oracle. You can think of that as a way to predict a price. In a different correlated market, if you're going to go sell your house, you may look on Zillow and say, what does Zillow think my house is worth? Imagine you could take all the attributes, not just the rule set someone's following or the data, and you could look at every single piece of data and value, just like you would for your house, what that carbon credit may be worth based on the data you're actually producing, based on new attributes like what percentage of funds go back to the community. We hear a lot about climate justice, but you would think you would want financial transparency to be part of that equation. And so we have these tools called ARMS that can do that at scale. They can match make the demand for credits based on emissions and do purchases based on attributes to show how you're reducing emissions in supply chains, the carbon reduction in the more developed world, but we can also show the economic outcome in the developing world. What often is economic development for these communities? Making sure your fisheries are well stocked, but in order to do that, you maybe have to plant mangroves, which is a carbon reduction. Those fisheries being well stocked means the community is eating well. They have a fresh supply of fish. They don't have to move to a city. Those sustainable development activities oftentimes could be attributes as part of a project, but today oftentimes are left out or are a brand-driven market approach. And so when we try to take this into a more understandable context, we use the Guardian, this digital measurement reporting and verification protocol, to transparently show something like emissions. We could be creating emissions tokens following standards developed by the GBBC and IWA. We could see that audit trail on a public ledger. We could understand what that audit trail actually means. We can understand what is an emission, scope 1, 2, or 3 as part of an organization. We can do the same thing of a mapped rule set for a carbon credit. Understand the roles, the actors, the data produced, what is valuable about that credit, and why we think it's valuable, maybe even to the point of payment to the community. And with the ARMS, we can help settle that transaction. And so we have folks like Avery Dennison. For those who don't know Avery Dennison, if you reach in the back of your shirt and you touch the label, they've probably made it. We're one of the world's largest digital trigger for RFID, NFC focused companies, and they create labels that touch just about every public good that you touch or any private good that's sold. And what they're doing on Hedera is they're logging billions of transactions. And those billions of transactions are tied to digital product passports, all unique items. And of course, as part of that product passport, you can carry an emissions profile. Now, if you carry an emissions profile and you log that to a public ledger, you can understand the source of not only the goods, but you can also say, well, if I'm calculating my scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions, if I'm calculating a product carbon footprint, that's where maybe I want to offset as the emissions happening. And you may want to even understand that. And we can tie these things together from when I buy a trusted carbon credit to a carbon emissions token, all on a public ledger, all with interactive use cases. You could do the same thing with renewable energy credits like ServiceNow is doing for your scope 2 emissions for the energy consumption. You can bring these assets together to solve real world problems and outcomes where you can show with provenance the data, the finance, and how it all links together. And as we think about this, we're talking about blockchain for impact. I can't think of anything more impactful than every single good that we touch being traceable, and affecting local communities to drive sustainable outcomes. So I just want to say thank you for the time. Thank you for GBBC for having us, and appreciate all the comments afterwards. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Just got here from Dubai, just for you. Got stuck in Toronto, so I was a little late. Really looking forward to it, and I cannot be more impressed by what I've seen so far. The use cases make the solutions of these technologies so real and impactful, and I've honestly been pretty touched by a lot of the progress that I'm seeing on a intellectual, emotional, and personal level. This touches, I think, in many ways what it means to be human as we're making the world a better place with technology and innovation. And this is what I want to talk about, our Global Standards Mapping Initiative, which is one of the major projects of our research at GBBC. It has built on a massive amount of collaboration involving hundreds of organizations across our community. It speaks to the value of networks. It speaks to the value of working together to address problems and address issues from different perspectives, which is what we need. So what is the Global Standards Mapping Initiative, and why standards? I'm going to talk about standards, what got us to where we are, and why it's important for where we stand here, Senate, US regulators, and this country. What are standards in technology and everything in life? Standards are basically common rules, agreed upon definitions, and protocols for how to work together, how to design things, how things work. It's basically focused on making products work. Like if you travel in different countries, there's different shapes of plugs, and everything else gets designed and produced accordingly. That's a standard. In food, there's standards for safety, and so that we don't get sick from chickens being either fed too much, too little, or the wrong thing. That's all a standard. And companies across the food supply chains would cater to that. In technology, it's really important to ensure functionality, that our technology actually works in order to even think of scale and getting anywhere, and that it functions at scale in ways that are interoperable, especially in blockchain, because we're talking here decentralized networks, we're talking peer-to-peer collaborations, and we are talking about community-driven governance, community-driven decision-making. So that emphasizes the importance of adhering to common standards. Standards also ensure reliability, that we trust a technology, and also safety, and that innovations can continue to build on each other. If something works, it can create ripple effects for other innovations built on it to work. And here we're talking tech stacks, we're talking protocols, we're talking, think of DeFi, we're talking sets of rules where innovations build upon each other. And here at GBBC, we've focused from the beginning on the importance of bringing collaborative working groups and other initiatives to promote standards as something that's key for scale. We have a token taxonomy framework that Wes knows very well, among others, that has produced technical standards for the tokenization of anything. If I tokenize my asset on my blockchain and Greg tokenizes his asset on his other blockchain, if we tokenize differently, we can't trade together. We can't work together. So we need common rules. And we're also, with our new BIDA initiative, really promoting tokenization, standardization through open data in supply chains. This is really important. I'll get there because we actually have a working group based on it. But in order for supply chains to be more harmonized, efficient, and echoing what a lot of Dale said, we need common standards. And again, we're standing here talking about standards. Often standards ensure that something works. When something works and we have common rules of the game, that is often a predecessor for regulatory developments as well. And we've seen that in other sectors. So our global standards mapping initiative with GBBC is a story of collaboration across different industries, across different stakeholders, from startups, corporates. Our membership represents academia, regulatory institutions, you name it. It started in, excuse me, we started in 2020 with GSMI 1.0, and that emerged as a very close collaboration with the World Economic Forum that was focused on really mapping out what legal and regulatory developments have emerged out there all over the world, and how have technical standards developed alongside all over the world. That was the crux of it, and the initiative as a collaborative approach was able to map, as you see, 185 jurisdictions based on regulatory developments for blockchain and digital assets. It involved a number of 379 industry groups working together to provide this information. And we were able to map more than 30 technical standards setting bodies that are looking to define technical standards for different aspects of blockchain technology. That initiative snowballed. By 2021 with GSMI 2.0, we added other key themes that directly or indirectly support the growth of standards. One of them is education. We mapped 389 university courses all over the world covering blockchain and digital assets. And we started a number of working groups to focus on aspects of technical standards as well as in-depth reports on key themes. And we produced 4. And obviously, we started to increase the level of collaboration and support. We brought in partner organizations to literally bring in fellows and scholars. And I'm going to explain later, but we have a wonderful set of people who join us for a part of the year, and they work with me alongside the rest of the team to help map out and produce this very comprehensive set of resources. By last year in GSMI 3.0, we focused on getting a lot of that data in a more interactive and user-friendly way. And obviously, we've expanded on the number of jurisdictions where we cover regulatory developments. We expanded it to 210. We expanded our standards bodies to 50 standards bodies that are covering the space. We grew our university course listing to 700 plus, and we added a map of stakeholders categorized by who does what. What are the main roles in blockchain and digital assets? We have wallets, we have exchanges, what are the different roles and how do they work together, and who actually belongs to those roles to make a difference. And we also built on the importance of having common definitions. Having common technical standards is very closely related to how do you define these things? What are we even talking about in order to work together? And this year, later this month, we will be releasing GSMI 4.0, which is, again, an update and a further snowballing of what we've been releasing every year. We have an interactive map of regulatory developments where you're literally going to be able to hover over a country and see what regulatory developments on blockchain and digital assets have been produced by key issue. You're going to be able to filter and really digest the information. If you think like, who regulates DeFi? You're going to quickly be able to see what countries have done what. We have expanded the taxonomy of definitions, and with the help of Ari and a number of others, a really great group, we have been able to document 220 plus key definitions. We've highlighted about half of those being priority for blockchain and digital asset, and the rest being obviously complementary. And as this is a neutral body and we are documenting the progress that it takes to define common concepts, we've realized there's actually several definitions out there, and many of them are actually very good. So we're producing an interactive tool where you can see the main definitions that are often produced by major standard-setting bodies like ISO, NIST, and a number of others. And you're going to be able to hover over key themes and see what the landscape of major definitions looks like. And Ishraq has been supporting and really pulling together the definitions that we give him, from the terms that we give him. So that's been great. We've been able to document by now 60 technical standards bodies. Technical standards are important, but they also come in different buckets. There's a number of movements that focus on best practices. There's other movements that focus on the code, the engineering, what the technical side of things has to look like in order, again, for technology to work. And then there's another bucket that focuses on how do things have to work in order to remain compliant with regulations. So we're adding that nuance. The landscape is obviously being updated with the stakeholders, who's there, who does what. There's been a fair amount of, like Heidi mentioned, bankruptcies and changes in the landscape. We're updating that. And as education in blockchain and digital assets is becoming more front and center, we have documented by now, also with the help of Ishraq and Joe, who you won't get to meet today, but he's also been doing a great job with us from CUNY, over 1,500 courses all over the world that produce either undergraduate, graduate courses, and professional certifications across the board. And we've documented them, created analytics by geography, by academic field, whether it be law, business, computer science, engineering. And we've also produced a country spotlight on Brazil. Brazil is really interesting. One of our co-authors thinks that he's a very, very opinionated advocate that Brazil is probably one of the most overlooked economies that is working on crypto and digital asset solutions. It's interesting because these developments are occurring over a landscape that has acquired the support of regulators from the standpoint of financial inclusion. They've developed a PIX platform where people already use digital payments. So in that context, the Brazilian population has shown to be much more open to experimenting with financial technologies, taking new risks, because they trust PIX so much. And the government has provided that trust in many ways. So that led to a leap in the use of crypto and digital assets for investments and digital identity solutions. And they call it, the central bank calls their goals financial democratization, anything related to financial inclusion. So that has been an interesting part of GSMI. In addition to that, we're also producing 4 in-depth reports from our working groups where we've had the pleasure to collaborate with brilliant and extremely innovative, creative, and absolutely respectable co-chairs. And we focus on supply chain, sustainability, AI convergence, and digital identity. I'm going to give a quick snapshot of the main themes of each report. Then I'm going to introduce some of the co-chairs who are here, and we're going to wrap it up. Supply chain is important in relation to our BIDA initiative that I know Dale, again, gave you a lot of insight on. We are living and breathing, everything we do touches upon supply chains. If I make a purchase online for like a birthday present, like Dale mentioned, it's an everyday purchase, or I go to the grocery store and I buy an apple. That stands on a very complex cycle of raw materials, production, shipments across different modes of transportation, across different countries, across oceans, ground, air, trains, for it to get to you. And often there's reverse supply chains when it's the wrong thing, or it actually is a sweater that doesn't fit and you have to return it. So those supply chains today basically are not harmonized. We need to harmonize them in order to improve efficiencies, reduce costs, and make the world simpler on where we land. And data, again, data, it's all about the data. We can't manage, we can't measure. And open data standards for supply chain are very important, and there's a call to action for people to join our BIDA initiative in supporting those open data standards for supply chain. Switching gears, when we focus on sustainability, Wes is also very involved with a lot of our sustainability initiatives. And in this report, we talk about the concept that we live in an economy that has functioned upon very extractive relationships, often between the global north and the global south, where a lot of raw materials and resources originate. And those extractive relationships have developed a very linear format of commerce, where there's extraction, production, consumption, and often waste. Our supply chains today produce an incredible amount of waste. There's different statistics, and in food, it's huge. And in addition to that, the fund flows have shown that through those extractive relationships, funds have been diverted out of the global south into the global north. And even if they go back to the global south through payments for raw materials or any other commercial relationships, they often go through financial institutions in the global north that they take a cut through transactions and eventually lend back money to the global south at very high interest rates. So it's a very difficult situation to manage. And if you think economic development for developing nations is also convenient for developed countries, for everybody to work together, having better commercial relationships and whatnot. So we're looking at use cases in the Web 2 world and the Web 3 world, where blockchain is already making an impact in sustainability for the world. Carbon markets being a huge one. When we talk about AI convergence, Neil had mentioned very, very accurately, there's a lot of risks, and obviously Mark Young had mentioned there's a lot of risks in AI, risks from centralization. We need decentralized platforms to improve trust. It's all about the data, and we're looking into use cases in financial services, in autonomous vehicles, and in government, where AI can be deployed for good with awareness of the risks in order to address them. And it all goes back to the data. The role of data, the role of blockchain as a ledger of data to validate, verify the provenance, and provide trust is huge. And finally, digital identity. Digital identity, there's so much promise in creating solutions for inclusion of populations, entire populations. For example, a billion or over a billion people all over the world don't have adequate digital identity. This cuts them off from access to basic services. How can we, through blockchain technology, be able to provide secure, privacy-enabled solutions for people to access the markets of the world, creating ultimately access to networks of productivity and exchange that are really going to bring into the fold of mainstream economies. So that's going to be the snapshot of GSMI 4.0. The process over the last couple of months has been incredible, working with a number of co-chairs. I'm going to mention them briefly. In technical standards, Neil here, along with Dan Conway from the University of Arkansas, have been great at getting the group to define what problems to address and getting a written aspect in addition to an analytical component. Taxonomy, we're working with co-chairs Brian E. Widdop from Hogan Lovells and Michael Wechsler from Queens College. Digital identity, we're working with a co-chair who's from Sankarshan, who's in India. He gets up very, very late and works at odd hours to support us. In supply chain, obviously, Dale and Greg Brown from UPS. AI convergence, we're working with Latham and Watkins, Jenny Tieplak. And in sustainability, we've been working with Blake Good from RFI Foundation and David Fortson, who is from Loa Labs, but also very involved with our Blockchain for Climate initiative, which is basically activist to industry movement to create collaborations to address climate. We've also produced a number of fact cards, which are visuals that basically tell you in one page, in your face, the main things you have to know on the key topics on blockchain and digital asset. They're sourced from our reports. So if you don't have time to read our full-on 20-page or more reports, you can see the key themes in visual format and see the relationships. We cover stablecoins, the green economy, CBDCs, crypto markets, blockchain for taxation, and more topics to come based on our reports that are to be published now. And I want to thank also our Milken Scholars and our fellows who have helped us along the way. The Milken Scholars come from our partnership with the Milken Institute. We get extremely qualified individuals to join us to support this project, mostly updating the regulatory map. They're often central bankers or heads of divisions from major institutions. And this year we had Gabriela Shibata from the Brazilian Stock Exchange and Abror from the Central Bank of Uzbekistan, who helped us with the Russian language regulatory developments research all over the world. And we really, really did a great job with tracking down the primary resources so that if you go to a regulatory development, you can click on the actual statute, the actual circular, the actual guidance, as opposed to summaries and news articles, which aren't as comprehensive. And obviously, Joe and Ishraq have been helping us find the definitions for our terms and find the university courses and do a lot of the really nitty-gritty work that has taken a long time, and we really appreciate it. And there's obviously a number of resources where you can follow GSMI, and we're happy to continue this collaboration. Over to Sandra.
So first of all, I want to thank all of you for lasting throughout this entire half day. It was a marathon, and I appreciate that y'all need a stretch now. We're going to let you do that. Also get some last drinks, eat all the food, whatever left over, please take it or consume it. I want to say just a couple of things. One, this was us coming back after 4 years. We do and we would like feedback. So let me just say a couple of things for post-event. Number one, we will be sending out, provided we get permission from everyone, we will send out links to not only all the slides, but also the videos of today. And those will go out to the entire registration list, which will include, we had about at the time, I think the last count, there were about 60 to 70 staffers across Senate and Senate and House representatives, different committees, and we will also send it out to the attendees who are here today, obviously. If you do want this to come back every quarter, I think we would like feedback on should the format change. I know we had members who wanted to cover things like healthcare and digital identity who couldn't make it this time around. So I think also asking us what topics are of interest to you, because our network is so big at this point, we have someone doing something in the category that you're probably asking about. So that, again, would be very helpful to us. And what we were planning on doing, again, think about it, we'll do one session over at the House, another session at the Senate, and we'll flip back and forth each quarter, or we can do a different format. But again, the feedback is going to be really incredibly important because we do not do things that members don't want. So if the members don't want to do this anymore, then we stop. We are very much a fast-fail group. So I appreciate that you are here. Take in some of that, give us suggestions. We'll make it as appropriate, any adjustments we need to make. And finally, I want to thank Diana, who just walked us through the Global Standards Mapping Initiative. I just want everyone to realize that this is the largest open source, open access, global collaboration that we know of that obviously does have some level of curation from us, but we literally take information from all over the world in different languages and try to synthesize across and say, we're not making a judgment call here. We're literally mapping what is going on across different categories. And that has brought together, at this point, probably tens of thousands of people collaborating. And we absolutely believe in the power of people. And this is how we have to remember to keep why this technology even, why are we here even? Why are people literally spending their entire time and lives on this stuff? It's because it's also a movement towards that people collaboration. And as the world gets more digital and data intensive, and let's face it, it's a little too much data sometimes, we need to think about how is it useful to humanity? How is it actually solving real problems in a world where, let's face it, we're also in perma-crisis all the time. Does anyone feel like we have a crisis around the corner every week? It certainly feels that way. But here's the thing. There's certain elements of the technology and bringing people together that could solve for certain things. Not everything, but certain things. And so I hope today gave you a flavor. I hope it uplifted you, even though Heidi depressed us a little bit, and so did Cliff. But no, there's a lot of great stuff going on. But even the work that WAVE's doing is actually critically important. Get the bad actors out. Find the bad people. Get that out of the system. Bring in the good. And together, we're going to solve climate action work. We're going to make financial services better. We're going to make sure that we are caring for the humanitarian aspect of problems around the world. We're going to empower women, children, people's voices across the world. Let's keep working together. So thank you very much.